1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Słyszysz mnie?
Tak. One, two, three.
Tak. Słuchać. Do you hear me?
Good morning to everyone. Happy to see all of you here. I apologize for a slight delay caused by the traffic jam here and arrival of the plane, you know how it is here and there. So let me start with the languages. We are having active and passive English, French, German, Spanish, Italian, and Polish. So I guess we can manage in these languages. Let me start immediately by welcoming a new member of our category, which is Kęstutis Kupšis from Group 3 from Lithuania, the Vice President of Lithuanian Consumers Alliance and members of the BUC at the EU level. So welcome, Kęstutis. If you would like to have 2-3 sentences, the time is now.
I think I will learn a lot being part of your community. I was always interested in all things related to the world of work, and I'm really I have really pleasant feelings being in your nice company. Thank you so much, and please accept my participation with open heart and open mind. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So let me just, because I'm definitely not the main person here today, because we are having our two distinguished vice presidents actually being responsible for the meeting, so I'm looking forward to it. But a short introduction from my side. We know that our today's category meeting touches upon the fundamental challenge that our societies are facing today, and it's the idea of a just transition, which is very close to our hearts. The threat of climate change is not a distant one, but something we are already seeing in our increasingly disturbing fashion. As the workers group, we are fully engaged in the Just Transition Alliance to find common ways of action against this. Our societies do not face the climate threat in isolation. Inequality, rising inflation, or poverty are often presented as conflicting priorities for efforts and resources. Some argue we should ignore climate as an issue. Others suggest radical climate action, even if it brings about a complete social implosion. These goals do not need to compete with each other. Fighting climate change, navigating the transition, and tackling inequality and poverty must be part of the same goal of sustainability as a whole. We are here today to learn of experiences of just transition and to discuss policies that can unlock the potential from different perspectives. And most importantly, for this category, always keeping in mind how can workers be involved in every and each process, not as an extra, but as a guiding principle. So now I leave to my dear Vice President to take the floor and moderate the panels and the panelists.
It's Marie Carmen.
Okay, Mari, it's your turn.
Okay. Gracias, Lucy. Gracias.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you, Mr. President. Thanks to all of you. Thanks for being here today. Thanks to the people who are online today as well. We organized this meeting because the digital transformation, as we've seen, is a revolution, and we see that the technological development can translate into precarity, and this doesn't go hand in hand with the objective of collective governance for collective bargaining and social dialogue. Rights of workers are put in danger. We know that. We are talking of bogus autonomous, and we need to give back the rights to workers in platforms. And then we have climate change, which is a new challenge for workers and for employment. We will need to defend our position as representative of workers. The reality tells us that we have a double trend. On one hand, we have the ecological transition with a negative impact on employment, and on the other hand, the governance in the transition for workers and the social dialogue and collective bargaining do not have very good results. We need to build a legal framework so that we can maintain good green employment. We need to put people at the center of the ecological transition, both at the legal and European and national legislation. This is what we see in the analysis of the packages for 55, where we observe that people in their democratic participation have an impact on social dialogue. And unfortunately, they are not part of the ecological transition. That's why we need this European framework to guarantee that the workers and workers' representative can be part of the transformation, and we need to take into account the impact of employment so that we can avoid negative impacts on labor. Only like this we can talk about just transition. And we also need to guarantee to protection of workers and the participation in this just transition and into collective agreement. We need a just transitions so that nobody is lagging behind. That's why we need to talk about ecological transition. For this, we need to ensure that the territorial plan for green transition go hand in hand with collective bargaining, with gender perspective, where the protection of work and employment and the support of people are conditio sine qua non, so that businesses can access to funding for just and green transition. We are talking about collective green agreement that has to be a way to improve democracy in labor. We need to improve the way to workers are taking a role in different instances. And given the complexity of the climate change, we need to put together at all levels of businesses, the EU, the nations, and also at the international level, so that we can really achieve a green economy and so that the transition do not translate into negative impact for employment. To do that, we are counting on different people here in this first panel. I will present them now. At my right, we have Lennon, who is policy advisor for the ETUC. Welcome, Ben Lennon. And collective bargaining is the way to tackle the environmental challenge and also to face the effects that this has on employment and businesses. In the opinion on green collective agreement, we highlighted that workers need to have adequate channel to participate in this field. In the collective bargaining, we need to have equal solutions on wages, equality, prevention of risks, and also we need contents, minimum contents that are linked to equal and just transition. So what are, in your opinion, the contents that need to be part of this collective and green transition?
Hi, yeah, thank you for the interesting and challenging question. This is something at ETUC that we've actually been working on for a while with our members, both in terms of like the climate policy team and the collective bargaining team, and trying to work out kind of what the synergies are between the two. And this is a work in progress, but we've started to develop maybe like 9 points that we'd like to see in terms of green collective bargaining, with the idea that in some ways the goal of green collective bargaining is about consensus building and to kind of try and achieve a balance between environmental sustainability and labour rights, that recognising at the core both of these are completely essential for long-term socio-economic well-being. So with our kind of, within the 93 trade unions that we represent and the 45 million members, this is it's been a long and challenging process to kind of come up with all the aspects that should be included, but I'll just kind of quickly run through the main 9 areas that we'd like to see in green collective bargaining as quick as I can. So I mean the first is about training and education, with provisions for employee training and education programs related to environmental awareness, eco-friendly practices and sustainable technologies. The second point that we think is essential should be on green job creation. So discussions on promoting employment opportunities related to things like renewable energy, energy efficiency, waste management, or other environmentally friendly sectors. The third, I suppose quite obviously, is a just transition. And so looking at the social and economic implications of transitioning to a more sustainable economy. So this could be negotiations around job security, retraining programs, income protection, skill development, and in general to provide support for workers that are going to be impacted by environmental changes, both within their current job or into new roles or sectors. And we think this is really essential to ensure that workers are equipped with the necessary skills, knowledge and expertise to make sure they remain employable and thrive in changing work environments. The next point that we are kind of working on is collaboration and participation. So like a collaborative decision-making process that encourages worker participation in any environmental decision and developing and implementing sustainable practices. So this could be something like joint labour management committees on environment, or kind of mechanism for sharing information and expertise, and also looking at the role that this would play with health and safety committees and the given responsibility within the just transition. And this is perhaps the broadest point that also stretches maybe to like looking at innovation, efficiency improvements, productivity gains, and enhancing overall performance while respecting the climate limitations under which we have to operate. And in some ways, this is the most exciting point, I think, because workers' input can help identify practical solutions, and their commitment to the transition can increase engagement and motivation. leading to an improved productivity, energy cost savings, and hopefully kind of better business practices. And I think that point really feeds back to the idea of consensus building that we mentioned before. Another point that we want to see in green collective bargaining is about just wages and working conditions. So fair compensation for workers engaged in green jobs or those contributing to the company's sustainability goals, but also to ensure that new roles or responsibilities are accompanied by fair and reasonable working conditions, which, as we've seen so far, isn't always the practice when people move from fossil fuel jobs or traditional kind of brown jobs to the renewable sector, for example. There's often a lower trade union density, much less collective bargaining. So that's kind of about ensuring it from the start that it's built in. And another point that should be included in that should be included in green collective bargaining is social and environmental justice that takes into account the impact that the new work or changing working conditions due to environmental factors has, not just on workers in the company, within the region or in the nation, but also in Europe and around the world, looking at supply chains. Another point that we want to see is urban mobility and energy efficiency. So how do people get to work, essentially? How can we kind of collectivize that, make it more efficient, make it better for the planet? And then the final 2 points are on health and safety. Again, addressing the changing world of work. This can be anything to do with heat or using new dangerous materials. And then finally, something that's often overlooked, we think, in green collective bargaining, is a gender perspective. And the aim would there be to push for policies that consider the unique challenges and opportunities women face during the transition to a greener economy. And also looking, when we're talking about a just transition, about those people that were excluded from the roles in the past that are transitioning. And amongst our members, kind of having developed these 9 points, something we think is really important in order to kind of lock these in or to secure these, is that in kind of any new EU environmental legislation or any development of the Green Deal that we have, is that when we are giving out massive amounts of public money, we should be making these green collective bargaining conditions a minimum requirement, and should see this as an opportunity not just to kind of, run our economy as it has been run in the past on sustainable energy, but actually a chance to improve working conditions and the conditions of our environment for everyone, both in Europe and around the world. Thank
you. Muchas gracias, Ben.
Thank you, Ben. In our opinion, in the EESC, we agreed with Group 1. We agreed with the group of the employer. Here in the EESC, 2 figures that are key to develop and manage the climate transition. We need to play a role in the governance mechanism. We need to be in a co-decision approach with businesses on measures and how we will tackle challenges and how we will adapt to climate change. We highlighted the need to establish environmental committee in some businesses, especially for businesses with an ISO certification. And generally speaking, we were speaking with the, what is the role that these figures can play when it comes to managing environmental transition and taking into account the fact that we need means and way to develop their functions, and they need to be paid for this. This is something that should be highlighted so we avoid misunderstanding. These are representatives of workers with environmental functions. We are aware, in our opinion, and we agreed upon this with group number 1, that we need incentives, we need allowances. We not only need a legal framework, we also need a way to develop these figures, this environmental figure. So what do you need? What do you think about these allowances?
Yeah, that's a very kind of complex question. but it's completely essential. I think having something like, joint environmental management committees or environmental delegates, on the ground, sometimes they're called green reps, environmental reps. This is about kind of the reality of a just transition on the ground and how we overcome the barriers to a just transition. I think when I think often at the kind of national level or the EU level, both in terms of government and trade unions, we have excellent policy on environmental action. We've had the idea of a just transition for years, but when you get onto the ground and see how it's being implemented, there's often a kind of disjoint between the policy and the capacity that individual unions have to implement this. And something like joint environmental management committees or green reps is the kind of the bridge between policy and action in the day-to-day. Previously, I've worked with on a just transition plan in the northeast of England, working with a mayor there, focusing on the automotive industry, construction and agriculture. And the consistent problem we found was that there was kind of brilliant top-line policy on what a just transition or climate action should be. And then when you actually go to the union reps in the region, they're too busy working on kind of things like pay, conditions, resisting cutbacks, that they don't have time. Climate action for them, understandably, isn't considered to be a priority. And we need to give them the capacity, the time, and the paid time to be able to make this a reality. I think this is kind of the essential way that we integrate. We move from the wonderful top-line policy we have to action on the ground and ensuring that this transition is going to happen. I think the Commission estimates that by 2050, up to 40% of jobs could be impacted by the climate transition in some way. And if we're serious about addressing the barriers to the transition, joint environmental management committees or green reps or a combination of the two is actually how we address this. And I think one example that illustrates this really clearly is if you're a diesel petrol engine car mechanic, the skills you actually need to develop and kind of maintain electronic vehicles is actually very different. An electronic vehicle is, essentially a computer in some ways. But there's no kind of capacity for these often very small operators like SMEs or, even single operators to develop the skills and the knowledge and have the time to change and to learn how to do this, because they're too busy, the day-to-day, and they're often not really aware of the extent of the change that needs to happen. So by having kind of mixed or joint environmental management committees or green reps on the ground with the paid time to develop training programs tailored to their needs, I think it's the only way we're actually going to address this. And in terms of the incentives, I think there's quite a lot of examples actually of from all over Europe of workers taking a lead through kind of worker committees, such as like arguing for the case of the installation of solar panels in a factory that reduces reduces greenhouse emissions while providing savings to businesses at the same time. And if we can kind of see, and it's the workers on the ground themselves who know often much better than the company management. And if we know how to kind of make the business case that this giving people paid time to do this work can make a healthier workforce and indeed some business savings and new innovation ideas, we can kind of work together to make this a reality, I think. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Ben, for your intervention. At the end of these interventions, there will be a question and answer moment. But now we will give space to the challenge of decarbonization, the challenge linked to economic change, because we are not taking into account this when it comes to impact in jobs. I'm not saying this myself. The initiative of the group commanded this study, an European study, to study this impact on jobs linked to climate change. The result was negative. All the experiences of a negative impact on jobs. There were few cases where we had positive results for jobs. In this study, the conclusion was that the majority of the area of transition where businesses had to tackle major changes, this was not tackled via the collective bargaining and social dialogue. Hence, we can say that in the cases where the impact were positive, it was because the social partners and social dialogue was taken into account, and this to tackle this transition in a positive way. To talk about this, we have Enar Alvarez Cuesta, who is research professor on employment, ecological transition in the University of León, and is also a researcher who collaborated with us in this opinion, and she drafted a study on all the green transition area in Europe. Is she connected? She's online. Is she there? Yeah. Good. So we'll give to her the floor. Welcome, Mrs. Cuesta. Thank you for being here, even if we are online. So the question are very concrete. What the representative of workers should do in the tackling climate change, and what are the differences when it comes to the impact on different levels when we are talking about tackling the energetic transition.
Muchas gracias por concederme la palabra y poder intervenir.
Good morning. Thank you for giving me the floor. When it comes to the response, and as said Mary Carmen Barrera, and when it comes to environmental transition, different items were impacted, as well as local authorities. Let me talk about women first, because with this just transition related to renewable energies and green jobs, the jobs are more technical, and we have a convergence of the green transition and the digital transition, which makes the access of women to such employment more difficult. This transition is going to affect mature people, and workers will have to reskill themselves, and there is no plan, no anticipation, as should be, in order to ensure the governance of such a transition, to make sure that this transition and the changes are optimal for these mature people who have always been used to doing the same tasks and having the same position. In some territories affected by the ecological transition, there's also some kind of job destruction, it was already mentioned, and there is no creation of new quality jobs. Young people in these territories are excluded as well from these employments. They are driven away from these places. It is a dark landscape indeed, but it can be changed with the intervention of union. It is necessary at micro level and macro level. At micro level, it would be at the social dialogue and negotiation and participation within companies, while at macro level, it will be more based on a social dialogue and union intervention that will favor transparency when it comes to the policies to be developed. There will also be a development of collectivities and people groupings in during this transition would be very useful, so that these groupings that have been groups that have been set aside can have some kind of governance that will be favorable for small companies. As we said, small companies will be facing more problems. At micro level, you need to focus on the participation within companies via collective bargaining and having a framework that will raise awareness amongst workers and favor this green, ecological, environmental transition while guaranteeing green jobs without discrimination, without inequality, and with an equal fair pay. The risks, employment risks related to green jobs have to be evaluated and assessed and also prevented without prejudice, of course, of all the issues that have been mentioned beforehand. Thank you very much, Hannah. The frameworks that have been developed are the right ones, but are insufficient. And I'm here mentioning the European frameworks. We have a lack of ambition. 5.6% of the EU GDP by 2050 could be affected if there is no adequate measures for this transition for a social fair framework. At what level should we intervene? We being workers' representatives? And what are the indispensable elements in those interventions by the Union? The most important elements are social dialogue, as I said, and participation within companies, including via collective bargaining. When it comes to social dialogue, I will join both questions, the obstacles and the means. Governance, bipartite or tripartite, of a just transition governance assumes that we need to work on the right mechanisms within the social and environmental legislation in order to ensure a genuine participation and a genuine social dialogue with union representatives. Let me pinpoint a couple of items when it comes to social dialogues that are already existing, but they have not been institutionalized yet. I would like also to say that there is a lack for a realistic implementation of those mechanisms. The framework may exist, but there are no results related. We need to have some kind of coordination at those bipartite and tripartite dialogue. Second axis, participation within company via consultation, information, and collective bargaining focused on the materialization of this transition. We need legal channels to make sure that this negotiation happens. Directive 2012-14 related to consultation and information could allow me to conclude when you talk about adapting their participation, when you talk about the future of companies, that there is a link with the green and just transition. It is based on those rights of consultation and information. But we should precise what are those rights to information, with the right to previous consultation, with specific deadlines. Within European Works Councils, there are different matters that can be negotiated and included into consultation. These topics should appear, and green transition should be a cross-cutting one within the labour world. It is also a topic on which the collective bargaining convention should be based on. There should be some regulation about the obligation of green reps in companies as soon as you have reached a certain number of workers. And when you have more workers, those committees, just transition committees, should be implemented and assorted with guarantees, collective negotiation, collective bargaining, could work on training, capacitation, reskilling, upskilling of impacted workers. Thank you. Thank you for mentioning these several points. So there must be some minimum contents within collective bargaining convention when it comes to the rights relating to the green energy transition. Yes, indeed. This green transition is affecting all companies and all production sectors, as well as on all workers, male and female. They will all suffer the impact of this green transition. That means that you need minimum contents in terms of transition in those areas, whatever the sector in which you are working. And you need to guarantee the right to information, consultation, and participation. It is necessary in order to ensure the governance of this green transition. Thank you very much, Hena. We will now move on. And we will continue our discussions, even though Hena will take the floor later on. Collective bargaining are key when it comes to negotiation, and Ben shared their point of view. You also need to think about including provisions within the collective bargaining conventions for ensuring a good environment with quality and security of employment. These are items mentioned on the opinion on green transition. We have some practical experience when it comes to collective bargaining, and we wanted to invite Patricia Ruiz Martinez, Deputy Secretary for Trade Union Policy of UGT, union in Spain. So she's also online. Thank you, Patricia, for joining us. I hope you are connected. If you can hear us, please press unmute yourself, press on the mic button. Is Patricia with us? Patricia, can you please raise your hand? We cannot see you. And turn on your microphone. There you go. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome. So I wanted to ask you a few questions, but I would prefer seeing you. And I can see you now again, so it's even better. It's a real pleasure to have you here with us. According to you, what would be the good practices and the right level of action when it comes to collective bargaining? And my question, the key question, there is a shy development to that green development. Good morning, everybody. Oh, the interpreter is very sorry, but the sound is awful, dreadful. We cannot hear you very well, and not sufficiently for being able to interpret.
Acércate al micro.
Hola.
Sí, te oímos bien. Sí.
Disculpad.
¿Hola? Ah, la conexión. Sí.
Dale otra vez, Patricia, a ver.
We just lost the connection with Patricia, but the sound was very, very bad.
Hola, buenos días.
Buenas.
Perdonad. Hay algunos problemas técnicos, parece. ¿Me escucháis, verdad?
Sí, te oímos.
¿Me escucháis?
Sí.
Vale, gracias. Bueno, muchas gracias por la invitación y gracias, Carmen, por las preguntas.
Thank you for your questions. In Spain, UGT is involved in employment protection, health, and labor environment. Oh, these intentions were translated into strengthening work for our union work. We are always betting on our union work, also on a better awareness raising in order to integrate all this within our work. And these are more focused on the greater social action. There has been some basic conditions. The interpreter is sorry, but this sound is really not good enough for proper interpreting. We will do our best, but yeah, Patricia, there's a problem. Sound seems slightly better. So, as I said, UGT is favoring a quality environment and protecting the health of workers. We have made awareness-raising campaigns in the framework of the European regulation in order to improve social protection of all workers. 6 months ago, we signed a federal agreement when it comes to collective bargaining. This agreement was signed with the 4 main players representing social players, social partners in Spain, so 2 employers organizations and the 2 main trade union in the country. In Chapter 16, this agreement provides for a collective bargaining with an implementation, daily implementation of measures in favor of a technological, digital, and green transitions. We are convinced that these 3 cross-cutting transitions mean obligations for all signatories, i.e. companies, large companies, but also SMEs, but also for trade unions, UGT and Comisiones Obreras. We have to provide in our conventions provisions for environment and productivity within companies. And these provisions have to be aligned to the reality of the labor market. This transition has to be green and fair, keeping in mind all male and female workers that need to be trained and that need to be able to take part through joint commission with a permanent assessment of this green transition. There is also a delegate in charge of environment that will help develop these proposals for the rest of the staff. We have also introduced very concrete examples in the framework of this national actor for collective bargaining. You will have delegates, representatives that will inspire the framework agreements. We're talking here about training, participation, design, adjustment of contexts and conditions within companies. This agreement should not be an intention declaration, just be limited to the digital aspect. It should also be supported with decisions. We have mentioned in those minimal provisions, for our country at least, different items such as development within the company, waste management, energy transition, not setting aside the need to promote company plans. And we also wanted to guarantee the right to consultation on environmental issues within companies. Workers have to receive clear information in order to consult with their experts and reach the adequate conclusions when it comes to their labor environment. We also wanted follow-up mechanism, monitoring mechanisms for the implementation of these measures. And we do believe that the measures that have been decided upon in order to face the environmental challenges in the short term, in terms of employment, all this means that there must be a consultation of all workers. In Spain, the major changes at employment level, not only at employment level, but mainly at employment level, should mean a consensus with the most representative trade unions. The employment reform has been on the table for over 10 years now in Spain. 50 days after the elections, the employment reform, has reached no consensus. There has been no information with social partners, and this employment reform puts Spain in a difficult situation, a situation which is not at all advantageous compared to our neighbors. The employment reform that was approved by the progressist government was a tripartite consensus. The government listened to the trade union and employers' point of view, and we could reach positive results like precarious work diminishing by 10%. So we are convinced that the green and digital transition could have a positive impact, and we are proud. We are proud of what could be made concrete. It was only possible with the participation of social partners, notably workers' representatives. We are going to keep on working along that line. Thank you very much, Patricia, for the very concrete measures that were made when it comes to the confederal agreement, this national agreement. We know that there is a minimum content when it comes to collective bargaining conventions and green transitions. Examples of provisions were mentioned. You talked about the inclusion of green reps or environmental reps. And you also contributed practically in this meeting on collective bargaining. Green Collective Bargaining Convention was presented. It is a positive case. I'm thinking of what has been done in the railway sector as well as in the cement sector, concrete sector. Results are convincing for everyone, not just for workers, but also for companies. It is quite clear that the lack of proliferation that could be hoped is related to different factors. Let me mention, more specifically in Spain, the need for decarbonization in some regions where social and environmental disasters were to be expected. For example, in the mining areas, we had to face all the changes that were expected. The lack of proliferation in other sectors on the transversal level is due to a lack of awareness when it comes to funding or financing employment, more particularly. Financing, training, awareness raising of labor. You need some awareness, some political group, and we know that, are negationists of climate change. Spain is facing a new process with a new national government. And yesterday there were some demonstration of these climate skeptical or climate deniers who want to be in power. And some are already in some regional governments and hurdle collective bargaining, attacking directly social dialogue in the regions where they hold power. They are also attacking all potential advances in this area. In the Spanish Parliament, we have such an agreement with companies and trade unions that provides that by 2025 all collective bargaining agreements will include environment protection and workers' protection provisions, while having labor work in that. So we are going to work along that line so that in the next 3 years, collective bargaining in that area can evolve in a good way. Thank you very much, Patricia. I would like to thank you for your intervention, and we will come back to you later on during this discussion. Patricia mentioned a key question that has been commented, which is the need of investment in the green transition, and that means investment in terms of awareness raising and continuous learning. We want a good transition, but we are well aware that digital transition created inequalities in the labor market, and it questions or it challenges trainings and wages. You need a lot of training so that workers can get access to those qualified and better paid jobs. Our opinion also underlines a key need when it comes to transition, which is about transition. It is essential for fighting against inequality and reducing the job loss risks. But all forecasts go along the same line. There is a lack of skills on environment and digital, and women are the most affected. Right to training should be a real, a genuine right throughout the person's career. Transition will affect all citizens, hence the need to invest in training. We have another guest, Mr. Paul Köffler, who is the Director General of Auflab, and he is also online. Paul, we cannot see you.
Bienvenido, Paul. Hola. Te vemos.
We will give it a second try.
Ok. ¿Cómo crees? Porque va a afectar.
How do you believe that this transition will have an impact on workers?
Pues decía, paso.
So I will repeat the question. How do you believe that these double transitions will have an impact on women in the employment, in the world of work?
Go ahead, sir.
Yes.
Paul, did you hear the question from Mari Carmen?
So, please, if you could repeat it again, because there was a technical problem and I was an interruption.
We will repeat the question. Paul, how do green transition, these double transitions, will have an impact when it comes to women in the world of work, taking into account the deficits that we have in the information gap?
So what I can see is that we offer a lot of educational program for women, and our problem is to motivate, first of all, to find women which show interest, and then to motivate them to join our educational program. So we would offer trainings for technical skills to prepare women also to enter the labor market for green jobs, but simply we can't reach them. So I see more the problem in communication, in let's call it public relation. I see the problem in informing, reaching also young adult to show them which chances they have if they develop into the field of green skills.
Pues muchas gracias por...
Thank you very much, Paul. Via collective bargaining, in close connection with that need of training, we can update the continuous learning programs in order to adapt them to the needs of green transition, and we need to focus. Not all kind of training is okay. Well, you need to have a validated and certified training. You need to also to make sure that the person works for training themselves. And we need, therefore, a license of training, a duly paid license for getting trained and taking part in all this. I'm thinking about the working week of 4 days a week. We need to think about anticipation in order to deal with all those elements that seem essential to the success of this transition, to make sure that this transition has a positive impact within on the labor market. Please press your mic.
So, Austria, I guess, can be seen as the holy land of labor market and all the educational programs which are available. And when we are talking about the programs which are offered, when we are talking about costs of life and that people are joining training programs, can find a secure income. So we are really on a very high standard in Austria. What I see is there is an absolute need that employees will find the chance to join training programs, educational programs, while they are working, and that companies also contribute here. Beside this, we also have it in Austria, these public sponsored training ships, so you can take a break, and the costs of living are paid, for example, by the National Labor Office, and also all the training costs that you can develop yourself, that you can contribute to the success of your employer, and this with a very low risk. But there must be more, and there must be much more in development, and not just public hand can take over all the risks for this.
Thank you very much, Paul. I believe that you have a presentation to show us.
As we have a, I guess, very unique project here in Austria, and I prepared a presentation for you and also a short movie, as one of our goals is to motivate women, in special young women, to join our programs. So this I have prepared, and I would like to guide you through my presentation and also to show you one of our movies. So maybe the best is I start with the presentation.
Paul, you can start. If you tell me, I will pass a slide.
Okay, so please to go on the second page, and this is how it all started. And Aufleb, it's not just our project is very unique. I guess also we as an institution are very unique, as we are now working for 28 years and established by the Austrian Trade Union Confederation and also the Austrian Economic Chambers, which are the owners of our institution. And the main idea was to offer educational programs for people that were losing their jobs in the field of agri and food sector. And we were building a program here financed by the European Union, federal states, and also the Public Employment Service, with contribution of the Austrian Trade Union to get support in a duration of almost 4 years, and we were doing a screening job, a qualification, and also gave support in the job-seeking activities. And in total, we reached around 7,000 or almost 7,000 participants, and 87% found a job because of this kind of support, because of this kind of training. And this model got developed. So when we started from people who were losing their jobs, we were developing into the field of we want to be part of this just transition process, and this would be then the next slide. And we were part of just transition of labor market and qualification. And here we had I use very often the word unique chance to be part of this process, to be here to support people, job seekers, and also companies to fulfill their needs. And just one number, at the moment, 315 active participants are joining our program, and what means our program will follow then later on. And if we can go to the next slide, please. This is the advantage to support companies and unemployed people. They will find with us a common goal. This means employees for developing and job seekers a new employer by doing training on the job and theoretical trainings. And we can continue. And this is our main goal: individual theoretical education as well as practical qualification in a company, which leads into a fully insured employment relationship. So training on demand, training on the job, and these are in these working fields. This was the definition of the just transition process. The qualification should take place in these fields: mobility, energy, building settlement structures, agriculture and forestry, but also recycling. And in the last line, you can see we achieve a goal of 30% quota for women, and still we're working on it. As I mentioned, it's pretty hard to reach and to motivate women to join this educational program. So, and the main idea was to offer qualification on several levels. We want to reach all and everybody in Austria. Doesn't matter from which base we start from. And so the specialist assistant is a low qualification, certificated in a maximum duration of 9 months. But also the apprenticeship, you know about the dual system we have in Austria. So within a period of maximum 24 months, you can learn the complete profession, or you already finished one, you have an exam, and you can join this higher qualification program and going on to the university. So also the chance here to join these educational programs on the university. What is important for us that 66% is the maximum duration you can do the practical training in the company, and at least 33% must be, it's an absolute must, theoretical training to give you the chance that you really learn as much as possible and that you're not dependent on one company, that you can build up skills which make it possible for you to move completely free on the labor market. And as you are doing the training in a company, the company also needs to offer you, give you a job offer, and this is declared in a kind of contract at the beginning of the training. So we are talking about a job guarantee. Thank you. The next one, please. And about the finance, so most of the money which is needed here is coming from the public sector, and we pay here coaching, mentoring, and training, and 7.5 million coming from the company, from the job seeker companies which have a need of employees. And from the participants' view, means all the trainings are paid. Also paid is coaching. As we say, you need some help, you need some support, and it will need specialists to guide you through the way of education and training. And you have a minimum amount of 860 euros per month from the Public Employment Service and at least 200 euros per month as contribution from the companies who are doing the training, and this shall offer a chance to survive in the duration of your training.
Paul, shall we play the video now?
That would be kind, because on our video, on this short movie, this is one of our participants, and it's a young lady, and she will tell us her motivation, and she's our role model, and one of our ways how we want to reach and to motivate young women to join our program.
Ich habe damals nach der Schule eine Ausbildung zur Köchin gemacht, habe mir aber sehr schnell umentschieden. Hi, ich bin die Bianca, ich bin 23 Jahre alt und mache eine Ausbildung zur Elektrotechnikerin. Ich habe damals nach der Schule eine Ausbildung zur Köchin gemacht, habe mir aber sehr schnell umentschieden, dass das nicht meins ist, aber wollte wieder ins Handwerk rein und bin über die Umweltstiftung dann zur Elektrotechnikerin gekommen.
Unfortunately, we didn't receive this video beforehand, so we won't be able to translate it.
Meine beiden Lieblingstätigkeiten sind das Überprüfen von Anlagen, einfach zu ob es funktioniert, und das Verteilerbahn, das Herzstück jeder Anlage. In meinem Job als Elektrikerin tue ich auch was fürs Klima. Ich montiere Photovoltaikanlagen, die nachhaltigen Strom produzieren. Du willst auch so einen coolen Job? Dann informier dich bei der Umweltstiftung.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Paul.
Thank you, Paul. It's very good, this video that we've just seen. That was the end of this panel. So now it's your turn. We can open the floor to all of you. So if you have any questions, please, it's now the moment to intervene.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Mrs. President.
I want to direct my question.
Palabras a Carlos.
Carlos.
Más. Dumitru.
Dimitri.
Con calma, gracias.
Little by little.
I want to direct my question to Patricia from UGT because I know that in Spain you have el Acuerdo Marco del Carbón 2019-2027, where what we call collective agreement was established between also the government of Spain and the regions and the trade unions, Comisiones Obreras and UGT. It's very important that the states also are encouraging a macroeconomic approach towards the regions which are in just transition. And it's not only mining regions, our metallurgical industries, are other industries which are depending on these policies. And the European Commission stressed the issue of a fund, was a Bloomberg philanthropy initiative. They said we will mobilize the funds from international markets to these regions. Unfortunately, we discussed only about money because we need money in order to support this transition. And this money are not coming. We have this Just Transition Fund, which is somehow around 8 billion euro, if we want to speak, it's operational, another 10 billion in Next Generation EU, but this money are in a bureaucratic form. Unfortunately, the labor opportunities, the jobs in the regions are not created. So I asked to Patricia and other colleagues, because we discussed about training, about this preventive, prophylactic activities, but what we can do in policy terms, and this is making the connection with Mr. Cuttings in the next panel, what we really can do in order to mobilize international capital in these regions. It's a lot of money on the markets, but unfortunately it's not going in these regions. What the government should do and how the trade unions has to be involved in order to convince these markets to invest in these regions and to change the regional profile of these regions. Thank you very much.
Sí.
You have the floor.
Patricia.
Patricia, are you there? Can you answer this question? Because this question was for you. Are you there? Yes. Can you please answer this question? Can you hear me? Yeah, the question was for you, so please, very briefly. Thank you. I was saying that we need that governments, unions, businesses establish plan to monitor and evaluate funding as well as training so that we can have a real upskilling and reskilling so that this plan that is established in these agreements can become something real. So not only linked to decarbonization, as the colleague was mentioning, we also need to take into account the fact that we need green transition of algorithms, and this both for a just transition and a green collective bargaining. We also need to include within our collective bargaining the green algorithms. 5.29% of total consume at the global level will increase by 20% by 2030. Spain and the government in Spain put in place a green algorithms plan, and we need to tackle the effects of green algorithms, of this energy consumption that is increasing more and more, and that will have impacts on jobs. So both decarbonization and green algorithms and all the things linked to the impact on jobs should be tackled at the European level. That's why it's of utmost importance to establish committees so that these measures can be effectively implemented to tackle the negative effects of the unjust and unequal transition. We need a control mechanism. This is the key, and digital is key as well. Thank you, Patricia. Next question, Andrea Monen, if we've heard correctly. You have the floor.
Grazie.
Thank you. Thanks to the all the opponents, and I believe that clearly we've seen that talking about just transition means, on the one hand, to mitigate the effects of change, and on the other hand, to manage that. And this via an implication of workers, and this to increase the participation of workers when it comes to business restructuring. Two questions. First, on participation. You're free to answer my question, whoever can answer my question. We need to put the focus on participation. The ETUC is promoting for a very long time a revision of EWC directive, but also a larger participation of workers. I believe that it's essential that workers can take part in the surveillance committees so that can manage ex ante the management choices when it comes to environmental issues. So how can we promote a real participation of workers both at the national and European level, taking into account that the level of participations of workers in the different European member states are different? And the second is the company rights. We need on sustainability the importance of rules as social accountancy when it comes to social accountancy that put into question by some political parties. Last week we've seen at the European Parliament a debate on directive for social accountancy. Luckily enough, the results were positive, but the risk was that we voided this of all the contents. So we put the focus on social and workers. So the question is how we can put a just transition in the company rights. So all the regulations, due diligence, social accountancy, and also taking into account the program of the Commissions that has as a priority to reduce by 25% the red tape for businesses. And this will have an impact on social evaluations and as well on social sustainability. The risk is that this minus 25% will translate into a risk for the social context and the environmental context for businesses. So the question is, how can we make a link between just transition and the company rights in terms of focus when it comes to social accountability for companies? Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'd like to take the first aspect of the question on participation and kind of the EWC directive that we've been working on for a long time. I think it's kind of a question of workers need to take part. How can we promote levels that are different? I think in 2021 there was a European Parliament resolution where there was an aim to get 90% collective bargaining coverage by 2030, which we're, as you mentioned in your question, like we're nowhere near that. It's extremely far off, and it's very different from country to country. Obviously, there's countries with a long tradition of this, and others that don't have it. And I think something we found from like talking to our members about this is how this is implemented is often very disappointing. Like there's a kind of a surface level idea of collective bargaining, and a actually meaningful level of collective bargaining. And when we're trying to expand this to green issues, it's even more complicated. And I think I think from Paul's presentation, what we noticed is that this is a really complicated challenge that requires much greater spending, both public and private. And as the ETUC, that's something that we're trying to change. The extent of the challenge, and Paul's presentation was amazing, and the results are really impressive and everything. But I think you can see how much money goes into just training a few thousand people, and the scale of the climate transition that we're facing. If you know, as I said, 40% of jobs will be impacted at least, according to the Commission, is that we need to kind of mobilize much greater spending at a national, regional, and European level. And how that can kind of match up with private financing in order to do this, and to give, as we said, like paid time in order to address the challenges of each region, each industry. So, I mean, I'm sure you know, but we're trying to obviously change the European fiscal rules to be a part of this, and that's essential to the just transition. And we kind of see this as impossible without public finance that is then met with private finance and coming together in a kind of multiplier effect, as we've seen on some scales. But it's the money aspect, I think, when we're trying to achieve these retraining programs and everything.
Enar, sí,
Thank you very much for this very brief intervention, Hines. Are you there online? Do you have anything to say regarding this question? Well, when it comes to the mechanisms to guarantee the participation, I believe that we have two and are linked to the dimension of the company. We cannot say that small companies have the same mechanism of a big company. In big companies, when it comes to the participation in the select committee, this could be the solution. But in small businesses, we need to go via the collective agreement. The structure of the collective agreement, both sectoral and entrepreneurial, should take into account the participation in the governance. Two ideas more I would like to mention. If we do not ensure this participation in the restructuration of participation, we will not have a tangible response. And I would also like to answer the first question regarding the coal agreement in Spain. One of the measures is the diversification of jobs. We cannot say that we only have one kind of work and one kind of sector. And also we need to take into account the quality of jobs that we create. In line with Patricia would say, we need to see what kind of job we are creating so that we can really invest properly. Thank you. Thank you, Heinar. And now we will move on to the next question. Claude.
Merci. On voit en matière de transition.
Thank you. When it comes to green transition, we can see very clearly the strategies and objectives that we can have with unionized companies. But we know that there are loopholes when it comes to the possibility of workers to take the floor and speak their mind. My question is, wouldn't it be relevant to think about how we can deal with the or use the territory dimension to reach that objective? As an example, I'm thinking here at 3 types of issues that can be developed based on territories. The very small companies. I'm not talking here about small and medium-sized companies. I'm talking about the very small companies. We know that there is a real weakness when it comes to the union representation. Territories could be additional challenges to what we can do, or issues of what we can do to sectors or branches. I'm also thinking here about the reconversion. It's complicated to change a company, but when you have a company on a territory, you have different relevant questions to ask. Example, what about mobility? In some countries, you have industrial areas that are implanted without thinking about the access for workers, without railway, without any childcare possibilities, and so on. Let me add that there is another players that we don't talk much about and are external players when it comes to environment and problems. Workers who live in the industrial areas can sometimes be the very first victims. When workers can gain protections and inhabitants don't have that same protections, how can we involve those players of the territories? How can they be integrated in order to avoid what we can see in many a situation? We can see opposition between citizens and workers about environmental issues. Thank you. Ben, up to you.
Thank you. There's a lot of questions in there. The first thing is the first thing that kind of sticks out to me is when you talked about transport. If you kind of implementing a new industry, kind of implanting it from the sky, as does happen, and by transport of people like getting to move there. I think like often the problem is also not just the transport of workers getting there, but like the services you need to provide around it. If you take the example in the north of Sweden of Skellefteå, which is kind of a new green industrial power, loads of state funding behind it, loads of ideas, but they can't get teachers to go there to teach the kids of the students. And I think that's kind of something that, and then therefore they can't attract workers to these new industries that are absolutely essential for us to have and everything. It's even a kind of bigger problem than people getting to work. And I think that's something that comes from a plan of government deciding overnight that this is where the winners and the losers are going to be and picking these regions, and not having the kind of consultation with communities about, how do we actually build up what we have already? How do we develop a plan for people to move here? How do we, as you say, provide transport? And it's kind of a result of this top-down one-way policy that isn't necessarily which kind of gets like the key of just transition. In order for a just transition to be successful, it has to have buy-in from everyone and from the workers involved. And I think that's something kind of like, proves the point that we need greater collective bargaining and, wider kind of public consultation. And then on the question of micro firms and how, kind of like you're saying, like smaller than SMEs, but actually one or two individual operators. I think the example I mentioned of car mechanics and kind of how them being at the impact of the transition earlier, and how in certain parts of there's examples in England of like individual operators coming together and doing and paying for a collective training course and sharing the price in how to move from diesel petrol vehicles into EVs. And just splitting the cost, and there should be much greater. I think that's like a really interesting example of how there should be much greater regional support, local government support, because as is like these individual operators can't just pay for this themselves, or too often they can't. And yeah, I think we need to kind of change our view and how we plan for a just transition on many levels. Thanks.
Gracias, Ben.
Thank you, Ben. Inars, do you want to add anything else? Otherwise, we will move on to the next question.
Vale. Sí.
Well, when it comes to the mobility, we need to take into account within the collective bargaining the mobility plans, and this taking into account the specific characteristics and specificities of every business. Many times we think that the mobility of goods to establish business, but we do not think about the mobility of workers. For this reason, we have a third circumstances. How can we integrate businesses and workers? This goes back to an ancient conflict which goes well beyond environment, and this is a conflict that we need to remove and eliminate, and we need a collaboration both from workers and environment. Thank you, Gunnar. Thank you. Next speaker.
Ja, vielen Dank, Kolleginnen und Kollegen. Begrüßt, dass wir diese Debatte heute führen.
Thank you, Mrs. President. I appreciate this debate today. This is a debate that we needed to have in the past already. When it comes to just transition, we have discussed about the fact that we do not have enough documents and material, so we should have a different approach, in my opinion. First of all, how unions are tackling change. This is not something new. We've always, as unions, accompanied change. We have had social plans, we've had collective bargaining. I've negotiated thousands of agreements, but now we have a different situation. Now we have a cross-cutting issue with a change based on phenomena. We have a digital change, but also a climate change, and this will have impacts on agricultures. We've not talked about this in agriculture. We've not talked about the fact that we will lose lots of soils, territories that will disappear because of climate change. This will imply more and more desertification and a lack of productivity. So the key issue here is the following: how we will integrate our approach in the policies that are adopted. It's not because we have unions, this is not enough. We have, of course, have a union representations. We will try to find a good solution, but we also need to discuss this, and this will leads me to the second point. What all of this means for the EESC. What are the requirements of Group 2 when it comes to these processes? What is important for us in this transition? What do we want to negotiate with employers? Because the employers at some point will tell us, no, we won't do this. That's why I want to suggest the following. We should tackle and delve more into details these issues and launch a campaign similar to the one that the employers launched, especially when it comes to competitiveness. This is an issue that the employers are trying to put in every round table and in every meeting. So we can talk about this point and this issue within our study groups when it comes to competitiveness. And third point, we already have documents regarding the topics we are dealing today. In September, an opinion was voted linked to just transition. The Secretariat can send you the report about this. And now we are dealing with our work as rapporteurs. And then I have a question to Spain. Spain is the only country at global level that has succeeded in put the just transition at the level of government. So I would like to know more about this. How did you achieve this, Spain? Thank you, Peter.
La palabra Patricia, que se prepare.
Before giving the floor to Patricia, I just want to say that these are advances we could reach at a Spanish level, and the Spanish presidency of the EU will mention conclusions during the next council, and it will mention the green provisions as minimum provisions. So in Spain, for 5 years, social dialogue is or has been at the very heart of all policies having an impact on citizens. In order to reinforce democracy and to improve our democracy, we are convinced that it needs to be enlarged to the workplace. And that means that there must be some democratization of working relationship at sectorial level, as Anna said. Governments, employers, SMEs, as well as representative unions have to be represented in order to make these transition more concrete. There is a question also on another axis, and let me mention other areas on which union collaborated. I'm thinking here about pensions and their indexation with inflation. Participation of unions within work councils to guarantee this adaptation. It is something necessary, and it supposes a national and European work. We need basic legal standards for ensuring adaptation in that sense. Example, the engagement for the next 4 years. Our governments have made that engagement. Reduction of the working day, which is necessary for this green transition. The government proposed to work 37 hours instead of 40, and we also want 35 hours. We want to go even further than that. This chapter should also be supported by a license to train, i.e. A paid leave for training. Something else that needs to be mentioned in Spain is the strengthening of accessory agreements when it comes to conflict solving for debunking negotiation or problems. When we are negotiating green transition measures, this is a useful tool for having solutions in order to unblock stuck agreements and it will also allow to progress. Conflict solving with external players should also be supported, and our progressive government is working on that. Let me now leave the floor to Tatiana. Very short, if you please.
Skills and upskilling, reskilling, and all the panelists have mentioned the importance of this. I hardly imagine that there is disagreement between workers and employers that the green skills, digital skills in this fast green and digital transition are the most important factor to move forward and to be also competitive, whether we want to mention this or not. But when we compare that the number of collective agreements which are tackling this, upskilling and reskilling, and when we go through the sectors, is very small. And it happens that sometimes we have this discussion also with the employers on why it's not happening. Although I cannot say that it's not existing, because there are different incentives which are coming from the state, which are coming of even European level. And the employers always answering it in a way that trade unions, especially in some sectors, are coming with the package of requirements when they put skills among other things like wages, like working time, healthier working conditions, etc., which is natural. And this prevents to move fast. And instead of taking this package, they say if we were tackling just one issue by another issue and then another issue, that we could move faster. So I know that this is maybe for Ben, he can confirm that this is long tradition in some sectors, that they tackling this package because they see this like in the holistic way. You cannot solve one problem when you are ignoring another, or just you need to do that in parallel. To which extent you think that this, let's say, focused collective bargaining could improve, let's say, one particular area like skills, and then maybe that would be a new way of the collective bargaining.
Vamos muy rápido.
Very briefly, please. Can we answer these questions? Carlos.
Gracias, Maricar.
Thank you, Mari Carmen. I will speak Spanish as I do not have Portuguese today. Very quickly, when it comes to collective bargaining and tripartite negotiations, well, these are the challenges of unions, and thanks to them, we've achieved many results in Europe. We're able to put in the negotiation some of the rights that we are defending. Digital transition, green transition, that's been approved in our committee, and this is the case not only in Spain, but also in other countries. Last week, we received the Portuguese Labor Ministry in our group, and she informed that the businesses that do not respect collective bargaining do not have rights to European funds. So this is important to say because it's a governmental decision. The second thing is that we discussed about shared governance, how to achieve this by implicating workers in the decision processes in businesses. This will happen in Portugal, and they also had workers representatives in the decision processes. We know Group 1, we know their behavior, we know what they are doing, and this, what they are doing is a blasphemy. They don't want to discuss this. So what can we do? Well, the State Secretary of Labor in Spain said that we need to establish a law so that workers are in the boards of major businesses. The same was saying the Ministry of Portugal. Portuguese government is saying the same. We need to have workers in the boards. How to do that? Well, via the law. And now we are. This is a challenge. This is a challenge for unions. This is a challenge for union confederations. And we can achieve this via a European law that at the moment does not exist. Competitivity for businesses will be more better with sustainable participation. Thank you. Florian, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. I'll try to be brief. So I think that in our committee we should work more in concerning just transition. Why I'm saying this? Because it's rather a huge challenge in some member states, and I'm working on this in Romania, and I'm supporting what Carlos just mentioned. We need an European approach in order to discuss with the government and with the member states in order to that just transition to be really just. I think also that we need a sectorial approach, because Peter just mentioned earlier agriculture. Well, agriculture is the new coal. So the exposure of some sectors in the transition in the transition process, well, is different, and it's not only about mining. There are also other sectors which are really affected, and we are not discussing about them. Then I have to mention, because it was not, and this is a question: do you think that timing is a problem when we are discussing about transition? Why? Because we need to provide jobs when they are needed. Because if a mine will be closed today and jobs will appear after 12 months, well, this is not a transition. This is collective redundancies. So we have to, how we can tackle this timing situation. Then, Mr. Forna mentioned something, the funds. Well, we are not discussing about the quality and the dynamic of the absorption of the funds. Because, yes, we have some plans. If we are discussing a just transition platform, we have some funds, but we need to create a synergy between what we are financing, when we are financing, and the need, the grassroots need, the needs which we are seeing at the grassroots level. Then, social conditionalities, because I have saw some plans, and there are a lot of member states which don't have any social conditionalities at a project level. By social conditionalities, I'm referring of the fact that every state aid, every investment should have attached social conditionalities in a way in which the workers are being protected, but also in a way in which local resources are being used. Because if we will invest in, I don't know, renovation of a building, and we are not using local resources, well, this is not a transition. This is something which is affecting negatively the transition. Then about the jobs, well, you cannot say if a mining worker will give up to a job which he or she will won 1,000 euro. And she or she will have to, another job is created, but in tourist sector for 500 euro. Well, this is not.
Florian.
Sorry? Sorry. No, everyone is cutting me the microphone.
Paper assistant,
yeah, just a small remark. The relation with SDGs, because this should be a process where we are moving towards sustainability. What is the link with SDGs, and how we are analyzing the contribution to the just transition to SDGs? Because there is no common data indicators. There is no common database. How we can tackle this? Thank you so much. We have discussed about women. What about youth? In my home country, it was a real push to insert in the monitoring committee of the Just Transition Platform a youth organization. So I'm not sure how it is in other member states. Thank you.
Isabel,
very quickly, please. Well, I will be very, very brief, and so let's talk about the future Belgian presidency that will start in the next semester. We are working on an exploratory opinion. We also have a co-rapporteur from Group 1. In this opinion, we already met twice, and we need concrete measures. This is what the Belgian presidency is requiring. And this to achieve the just transition. We also planned in our measures all the requirements that are necessary within the collective bargaining, social dialogue, and also the training and social protection that needs to go hand in hand, and also the issue of employment and women access. There is another issue, which is the change within the European semester, the equal share of benefits in the just transition. In one of the conclusion, we asked and requested to the Belgian presidency a European regulation. Here we will have some difficulties, which is a co-rapporteur. We are already talking with him. I would like maybe to know if this might be an instrument with added value for us, so that we can delve more into the just transition principles. Maybe Heisnar could give us his point of view.
Isabel.
Thank you, Isabel.
Rápido.
Sorry, a lot of questions there that I will try and answer with one big, broad answer. I think, Florian, on your question on, or one of your questions on agriculture as the new coal, and like needing to provide jobs today, not having a delay between jobs ending and other jobs coming, and kind of relates back to what Peter asked about the impact on agriculture, and how do we integrate our response. As part of the ETUC, one of our main goals is to get a just transition directive passed at an EU level, but that kind of is centered around like the anticipation and management of change. So we're kind of, that national and European policy is proactive rather than reactive in these changes. I actually think companies are often much better at planning for long-term scenarios than national governments that go in 4 or 5 year election cycles. And what that would look like for agriculture is, like, as everyone in this room knows, that the agriculture industry is going to change. Where we can grow certain crops is going to change. We have at least estimates of this, and we need to be realistic about this. And we need to be planning for, like, if agriculture in one certain area is going to end, we need to start, if it's going to end in 10 years, we need to start retraining the people in the schools and working in the agricultural sector there now for all different types of agriculture they can do, or alternative employments. But also, if certain crop production needs to move to different parts of Europe, we also need to train the workers there where it's going to go. And I think this kind of goes back to another point that you made about like the kind of narrow conception of a just transition at a national and European level. Like a just transition is a lot more than coal, peat, and steel, and a few high carbon polluting industries. Most people don't work in those industries. I can understand the point for starting there, but just at a kind of, I think at a European level, the conception of a just transition is far too narrow, and it's reactive rather than proactive. And we think something like a just transition directive would be, a step in the right direction, where we can have long-term planning, contingency plans, and different strategies that anticipate and manage change, rather than just responding to, oh no, we can't use coal anymore, shut it down, what do we do?
Gracias, Ben. Enar?
Thank you, Ben. Henar, very quickly, please. Yes. Generally speaking, I think that a directive for just transition could be a good way for having a global legislation rather than a fragmented one, because what we can see is that there's a lot of fragmentation, and sometimes there is even an annihilation of strength. In Spain, what worked is the social condition and the environmental condition for getting public tenders. For example, you need to have equality plans. If you need to participate in public contract, public agreement, so you need a just transition plan, and the collective bargaining needs to integrate all that kind of measures. Be it negotiation, well, you need to integrate that at different level. And I think that I have nothing else to add. But also, as we said, yes, the youth has to be represented. Young people, men and women, have to be integrated. When I'm talking about territory, of course, I'm relating here to all the people living on the territories, whether their age. Thank you very much, Hannah. Thank you very much to every one of you. You have not responded to Tatiana's response.
Yeah.
I asked that unions usually come with the package of requirements. That makes
Microphone, please.
collective bargaining very long and sometimes
Yeah, so I think, and you asked about like, should we prioritize skills within this? I think maybe there is an argument for prioritizing skills. It's difficult. It's a difficult balance. Like, do you want to completely cede the territory, or do you want to meet halfway, or so something we're working at the ETC level is I read out the 9 things that we'd like to see. It's very much a work in progress. It's not finalized, and we are trying to think about what to narrow it down to maybe 3 or 4. So we're not just going for with one aspect of skills, but maybe not 9 things either. I think there is an argument for prioritizing skills because we don't have the workers to meet our own European targets. If we want to meet our European targets, we need 1 million solar workers in the next 7 years. There's no plan in place really to get this. If we talk to like business counterparts, they're struggling too. So I think I can't really give an ETUC answer on that yet because we haven't finalised our position. But we are trying to narrow down maybe 3 or 4 key points to be a bit more realistic. And skills is likely to be included in that, but we can't say yet.
Gracias, Ben. Tatiana.
Thank you, Ben. Tatiana, I hope it answers your question. All right, I would like to thank you there again for participating. We have talked about the just and transition and the impact, and what we need is creating a framework that puts the human beings at the center, and we need the right tools for modulating the transition effect and indeed to avoid negative effects on employment. We have also talked very concretely on the minimum provisions to include in collective bargaining agreements. It can be a way to improve democracy in the environmental aspect. It's also a possibility to allow workers to have more rights. It's also a question of investment in training, because we need the right skills and we need to give the people the right to get trained and upskilled or reskilled. And also those people need to have time to train. And we have also talked about the political framework, the possibility to have a European directive that would have all the national framework come together in a more coordinated way. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to count on all of you. Thank you very much, Ben, for being with us. Thank you also to the online people like Henna, Patricia, and Paul. So thank you very much for taking part in this discussion.
Thank you very much. Also, thanks, Marie-Carmen, for managing the first part of the agenda of today. And we are moving, Thomas, to you to go on with the policies. We already touched upon the issue. We've touched upon the potential trade union response or social dialogue issues. So up to you to go on with the policies to complete the picture. Thank you.
Ja, vielen Dank, Lucy.
Okay, wait. We need to bring the people.
Ich darf unsere Rednerinnen.
Thank you. I would like to thank everyone here, and I would like also to ask the panelists to come to the stage.
Everyone here with the exception of the Oshaka. Sorry? We've got everyone here in person with the exception of the Oshaka.
Ja, vielen Dank, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen. Wir hatten
So, thank you, my dear colleagues. We now have the possibility, we have had the possibility to have very intense discussion for a couple of hours. We have delved upon the union practice when it comes to this double transition at social and environmental levels. And I think that we could hear in the different presentation that there is a whole series of central requirements that can be seen from the angle of workers and union representatives, but also requirements that are necessary for our companies and societies. I took a couple of notes that will be very useful for our future discussion. Nobody should be left aside during this transition. You should not have a dividing effect in society. This transition gives us the opportunity to improve working conditions for our colleagues, men and women. We have to do something, of course. It does not it goes as such. We need to see how the social dialogue would be organized. It's a whole transition and transformation process around social dialogue. As was mentioned, we have also discussed a lot about collective bargaining. We are talking about minimum wage, and we're talking about the different collective systems and their potential future structure as well. How can we strengthen staff representative in companies? You need to ensure information, consultation, and participation. There's another central requirement to talk about training and reskilling, upskilling, and so on, in order to have it all, to have the whole picture. You need also to take a look at the finance level and a fair transition, how this will be ensured from the state and the European Commission. There are quite a lot of tools already existing. They need to be reviewed, maybe reformed. And there's another very important aspect, which is public service. And public services of a welfare state can be quite different between the different member states. It is also a tool that we must use. What is the fair repartition during this society transformation? As a politician at European level, what will be our programs, and how can we make sure that at national level they get the support for transposition? You have the Stability and Growth Pact, more flexibility for public investment. You have to also talk about the economic governance here. And indeed, this deals with growth and competitiveness, but there is no infinite growth. You need also to talk about degrowth and public service. Well-being at European level could be put at the center. We have talked about public investment. The social and environmental transformation is only possible when we have funding, to have some kind of golden rule for funding, the just transition rules. This should not only remain at European level, but also at national level. And you have the social climate fund, the just transition fund, that could be supported by a directive in order to be transposed at national level everywhere in Europe. And then you have also the spreading of all kind of measures. And this, of course, requires some framework conditions and some strong measures. I am delighted, therefore, to have very competent people around me, and they will give us very interesting presentation, I'm sure. I would like to welcome you here, and we will talk about the European policies now. We have the feeling that there are a couple of loopholes that need to be filled, a couple of gaps that need to be filled. And I start with Mr. Frank Zeeburn Thomas, Head of Unit Fair, Green and Digital Transitions. You in the DG Social Affairs, Employment and Social Inclusions. You are in charge of green transition. We have already discussed with you. In October, you talked about the just transition towards, or fair transition towards CO2 neutral system, and how economy and politics can bring their building block. So this could be a topic you can mention as well. I would like also to see the relation between the green aspects and the digital transition at European level. Are there synergies that have been thought? What are your experiences at that level? Right.
Introduction. Good morning also from my side.
Thank you.
To say a few words, introductory words on the European Just Transition Framework, if I may call it like this, for the further discussion, obviously, and the discussion which has already started on the way forward. Having followed the previous discussion, I will probably start by coming back to the question of, is that our framework people-centered? Is it worker-centered enough? And is the policy framework, are the policies sufficient, or is more needed? And then I come to the second question on the synergies, which is a complex one. I just would like to make the point that I think we believe that we have put in place, or have tried to put in place, a European framework for fair transitions, in particular in the area of the green transition, the transition to climate neutrality. But it's probably also a good moment, obviously, to review it critically and to see what's working, what's not. And the point I'm trying to make is that this framework is in place, that monitoring exercises are ongoing, that it has a focus on people and workers, but that further efforts are needed to ensure implementation going forward. One word on the people-centered. We did in 2022 a Eurobarometer survey, which looked at the fairness perceptions of people, their fairness perceptions of the green transition. It's essential, and I think I agree with my colleagues here on the board, that the European Green Deal, that the Fit for 55 package, a lot of the initiatives taken at European level have integrated fairness aspects and have tried to do this in a cross-cutting manner. There are many tools which we are discussing here. I will mention one which was led by DG Employment, which is a so-called Council recommendation on fair transition, which was adopted in June 22. And we have taken a lot of, let's say, efforts also to base this on evidence, to base this on expected employment impacts of different transition scenarios, to take into account distributional impacts, so the helping companies and people facing higher energy costs, and also to take into account fairness perceptions. And the Eurobarometer was one of those. If you look at the figures, people overall are convinced that these activities are needed. The climate transition towards climate neutrality is needed. They are willing to contribute in their jobs, or as consumers, or as a citizen to it. However, it also shows challenges. They are not confident that they have the skills needed to do so. They are not confident that we can reach our targets by 2050 to have in place sustainable goods and services, which is a challenge. If people do not believe it can be done, why invest in reskilling, upskilling? Why change consumption behaviors? Why change mobility behaviors, etc.? And we have asked also about what policies they support, and there's huge support overall to put in place accompanying policies, supporting policies, supporting people in their job-to-job transitions, reskilling, upskilling, supporting the development of new business and consumption models, supporting vulnerable groups, and so on. Second point, workers. Is there a workers' focus? Yes, there's a workers' focus, as will become clear, because our council recommendation looks at all types of people affected. Those most affected by the transition, which to a large extent concerns workers in the sectors concerned, discussed already, but also in the economy broadly, and in sectors phasing out activities, in sectors transforming activities, but also in sectors emerging, new economies. In addition, the recommendation looks at vulnerable people overall. This is not only about, just transition is not only about workers in the mining sector. I would agree with this statement. It's about taking along everyone in all their different roles. so that's my second point. And my third point I wanted to make on policies. Are there policies missing, or do we have the policy framework in place? Our recommendation, which is a legally non-binding recommendation, however, commits member states, or member states have committed by it to assess and put in place, to assess policy challenges and to put in place comprehensive policies which address these challenges and which tackle employment and social impacts of the green transition. This includes employment and skill policies already discussed, but also social protection, tax policies, and access to essential services, which was mentioned before. Availability and access to affordable alternative modes of transport is key in the transition, for example. There was one question before, and the same as access to energy. It also, this recommendation includes a focus on a clear evidence base. We need to know what the actual impacts are and what the expected impacts are, including on workers, including on skill requirements, including on household expenditures, and so on. And most importantly for the discussion today, it promotes a whole of society approach. It makes a clear reference that member states should put in place these policies together with social partners, based on collective bargaining and social dialogue, and also involving civil society at large. We believe, and this recommendation makes this clear, to put in place an inclusive and democratic transition, which leaves no one behind, has to put in place such schemes. To finish, and maybe I can come back to this in the debate because I don't want to be too long at the beginning, we believe the policies are there. There are the broader policy frameworks I have not presented now, obviously now. The European Pillar of Social Rights, minimum wage, minimum income initiatives were mentioned, a recommendation on strengthening social dialogue overall at European level, which is being implemented, many other policies to put in place, sustainable competitiveness, inclusive growth. All of those obviously do contribute to a just transition. Those mentioned in the recommendation, we believe the focus now is on implementing it, on monitoring it, and on engaging with all stakeholders in a discussion. We have started to do that. In the last 2 years of European semester country reports, there were specific annexes on the fairness aspects of the green transition, and there are weaknesses as regards the evidence-based indicators we may want to discuss, but we are trying to develop this and include it into the economic governance framework. Also, we had a discussion with Employment Committee and Social Protection Committee last week, which was the first round of reviewing the state of play in the member states of implementing fair transition policies against the fair transition recommendation. And some of the points raised before in the discussion, like Spain being an example of having a holistic strategy in place, or other countries developing specific tools, have been discussed, and we will report back on those, and we'll continue those discussions with social partners and with civil society at large. And also in the current update of the National Energy and Climate Plans, the Commission has issued the guidance, and we have included that member states should assess also in this context just transition aspects, skill needs, social investment needs related to reskilling, upskilling, and others, because we think there cannot be a 10-year energy transition strategy without looking at these aspects, and the Commission is currently assessing those updates. Earlier in October, in addition, there was a thematic discussion at the Employment Committee in Madrid, which looked very specifically at job quality creation in the green transition and job-to-job transitions. I think a colleague from OSH later will say a bit more about this, but a lot of work is going on, also assessing more specifically the quality of the jobs created during the transition and in the new sectors of the green economy. This is essential. New jobs in the circular economy have to be of good quality. New jobs in a transition have to offer conditions which are equivalent or as good as those in the previous job, ideally, as part of a transition strategy. So with this, I hope I have made my point that we believe there's a policy framework in place. However, I also can admit that the first round of review with the member states end of October has shown that most member states so far have used their existing policy frameworks. Not many have necessarily designed new tools or new policies addressing specific aspects, and that's probably something to be assessed as we go along further and when we discuss what could be ways to improve it. Last but not least, on the Commission side, this is also mentioned in the recommendation, we also have taken the commitment to improve the evidence basis. In particular, we take good note of requests to put in place a fair transition observatory at European level. Member states and social partner stakeholders will benefit from putting together, we believe, the existing evidence, from providing more granular evidence, including impact assessments of policies, and also share best practices in this area, which we are promoting as well. So if, I forgot your second part of the question, which is a very specific one on the synergies. I think that's a difficult question because obviously the strategies, to be fair, my colleagues can correct me, probably are in parallel and the challenges are a bit different. The digital transition is a very much technology-led transition to which we are responding through a European Declaration of Digital Rights and Principles, through initiatives on enhancing working conditions, ensuring working conditions in the platform economy. There will be a European Employment and Social Rights Forum next week. During 2 days, we will discuss the impacts of AI and digitalization in the world of work, on the future of work, on which you are well aware. The green transition is more of a policy-led transition by setting a clear framework for a transition, long-term transition, yet having to move also in setting incentives for companies, workers, consumers to be part and engage in this transition. We believe that there can be a lot of synergies between the two. Digital tools can help the green transition, can improve working conditions under heat stress, can inform energy consumers, for example, to reduce their bills, and so on. But we also are aware, and previous analysis has shown, that digitalization has to a certain extent led to polarization in the labor market and to creation of high-quality jobs and low-quality jobs at the same time. Our analysis so far has shown that the green transition seems different here. The green transition is one which could counter such polarization and create jobs mainly in all skill categories, but mainly in the middle-skilled, middle-wage jobs, construction and others. And we believe we have to put in place policies which explore these synergies to contrast this kind of decision. Last year's Employment Forum discussed this issue on the social dimension of the green transition, and one point all stakeholders made is not to allow the green transition to lead to a new green divide, adding to a digital divide which could exist, or which does exist in parts of our economies and societies. This said, we have launched a study with our colleagues at the JRC to understand better what are the interlinkages between the two, because these synergies are not automatic. I stop there for the time being. Thank you very much.
Ja, das klingt ja sehr geschäftig, das klingt auch sehr vielversprechend. Ich habe irgendwo so den Eindruck, dass wir halt auf sehr, sehr vielen verschiedenen Ebenen hier Aktivitäten setzen als Kommission, aber da teilweise...
So it's very interesting. Thank you very much. There are activities at several levels, sometimes in parallel, but there's a lack of consistency. I think that consistency is important to reach our objectives, because supporting everyone and all the people supporting us, this, of course, will lead to results, especially when these people play their role. Isn't there a conflict between economic interest and a lack of interest for workers?
Thank you for the question. As I said before, this is a comprehensive development. So you're alluding probably to the last part of initiatives which are under the Green Deal Industrial Plan, Net Zero Industry Act, and so on. I think I would argue they are not conflicting but complementary, and they address at the same time industry as they address workers and consumers, because only together they can bring about this change. We believe that the Green Deal, it was presented as a European competitiveness and growth strategy. During the energy crisis, a lot of measures have been put in place, also supporting developing new forms of solidarity mechanisms to support households, to support companies throughout the transition. And I do believe a lot of the tools which are being put in place are there to support both. As Ben said earlier on the panel this morning, obviously trade unions or workers are not against competitiveness, are not against productivity increases and so on. That has to be part of a strategy. What that means in terms of policy conclusions and how to let's say, share costs and benefits, that's probably a different issue. I would argue that the recommendation I presented sets the stage for meaningful involvement of social partners, collective bargaining, and civil society at large, without which that transition cannot succeed. There are a lot of initiatives supporting this, academies to support reskilling, upskilling for batteries, for hydrogen, for new value chains, large-scale skills partnerships involving all actors, asking the actors to define what are the skills needs, what are realistic pathways to reach our targets. The question you're asking is, in the concrete, if I understand correctly, in the concrete implementation, are we doing enough? Are workers involved enough? That's a difficult question. One we have to look at also in the recommendation. Probably not, or probably certain processes can be improved and strengthened here. And I take note, let's say, of the different requests which are out there for just transition plans or others to align them more, to align the tools further. What we do on our site, in addition to the evidence base, we have launched a couple of social innovation projects. One of them, and I would like to highlight that because I think it's interesting here, and some panel members are involved, is about strengthening trade union representatives to take up a proactive role in climate discussions within their companies and help them develop in multinational companies in Flanders and the Netherlands such roadmaps and plans which provide clarity and exchange. So I think there are good practices, Austria was mentioned before, workers' academies and so on, which we need to exchange and build on. There are also, this can go up obviously, and the European level, that's probably actually where I should have started, has a role to play. At the Tripartite Social Summit, these issues are being discussed. At social dialogue committees, sectoral social dialogue committees, green and digital transition related challenges are being discussed. Some sectoral committees have started discussions or negotiations on a possible just transition framework at sectoral level. So I think there are initiatives which could be taken. Point taken that coherence can be strengthened or alignment or implementation can be improved.
In diesem Zusammenhang sind wir uns natürlich einig.
So in that context, we are all in agreement. You need more life in your social dialogue. This is a very large range of important measures, and we can come back to that later to see how this can be transferred to national states, because there's always a gap there. I would like now to leave the floor to Madame Milena Damianova. You are legal officer at DG Klima. You are an expert when it comes to European system, and you have taken part to the creation of the European Climate Fund. We have already mentioned this topic 2 years ago. We even issued an opinion. In the meantime, we had the energy crisis. 34 million people within the EU are in a precarious energy situation. We have huge mobility issues. These people have a hard time integrating or reintegrating the labor market. The goal of this fund would be to be some kind of help for vulnerable households, for small companies, and for workers who have to commute, for commuters. So these financial means are made available. How are they made available? How could they be increased maybe in the future? in order to allow this fund to reach the objective set by the European legislator?
Hello, thank you, Mr. Cutting, and thank you also, Frank. Indeed, I was part of the negotiating team together with Frank, and of course of the Commission for the Social Climate Fund. We are happy that it was established indeed, and a regulation on the Social Climate Fund was published and entered into force in the summer. And within the negotiations, we took very good note, and we took into consideration the opinion of the European Economic and Social Committee, which was very relevant. And yes, so I'm now to present it a bit, and also some of the challenges. Indeed, this fund is a very specific fund. It is much more targeted than if you compare it to the Just Transition Fund, the Recovery Resilience Facility, the cohesion funds. This fund was established, and the Directorate General for Climate Action was promoting this fund because this was one of the tools in order to reach an agreement for establishing emission trading system for road transport and buildings. Why for these two sectors? It was very important because we saw that the emission reductions in these areas were stagnant for the last few years. Some, even for the transport sector, they were increasing by 7%, while we had all the industry and electricity, which was included in the European emission trading system that started working already from 2005. The emissions were progressively reduced, and it's around 40% now, 36% from the moment we started in these sectors only. So in order to reach the most cost-efficient way, we, the Commission and DG Klima, proposed the new emission trading system. But we were really careful, and we were aware that we need to have a really a green transition where no one is left behind. This was the key principle which was included in the European Green Deal. And that fund, establishing the Social Climate Fund, had this main objective to facilitate the green transition, but to enable and to help the most vulnerable groups in the EU to face the challenges from this new emission trading system. And by the way, if you think about how indeed the prices influence the consumption and the emissions, consumptions of fuels and emissions, recently there was a report already that the emissions from buildings in 2022 have drastically reduced. Before that, they were stagnant. They were even slightly increasing until 2019. But now we saw that at least 10%, only in 1 year, 10% of the emissions were reduced in the building sector. And indeed, this was the very difficult year of the energy crisis, with the outrageous aggression from Russia against Ukraine, and the attempts of Russia to influence on of the European Union. So, but then the consumers, even at home, myself, I started taking care of the thermostat. So you see that if there is pressure, and by prices, there is a good way to discourage and to decrease our emissions. But it's obvious that the households who have enough funds, like middle class or up, they can take care of the challenges. But we, in order not to leave to leave no one behind, we needed to take care of the most vulnerable. First, it was to identify who should be targeted by this fund. This fund, the idea was that from the emission trading system, not only you put pressure on the prices, but you also generate income, revenues, and these revenues could be used for the most vulnerable. Initially, the Commission suggested that this fund is included in the multi-annual financial framework, the current one, until 27, and the part 25% of the auction revenues of this new emission trading system. Then we suggested start in 26 in 25 to generate revenues and to go to the union budget, and from there to have enough money. The financial architecture of the fund is slightly changed because of the negotiations. There was no appetite to reopen the multi-annual financial framework, but we have a big fund with very targeted and clear objective to help the green transition in assisting the most vulnerable throughout the whole EU, not only in few countries, but in the whole EU. We are conscious that there are vulnerable, there are low income, there are people in energy poverty and in transport poverty, and we need to take good care of them for this green transition. So the fund is 65 billion euro for 7 years. But this is not the only amount. The amount is to be increased with 25% additional, but not 25% of the 65. If you consider the member states also need to prepare, like the recovery resilience facility, they need to prepare plans, and in these plans they are to identify which measures and investment they would finance in order to support the most vulnerable. And it's very important. We have identified, the co-legislators have identified which are the key measures, and this is the answer of your question. The key measures are in both in the building sector and in the transport sector. In the building sector is basically to make the buildings more energy efficient, and there are already existing types of measures that can be supported with this fund, but only for the most vulnerable. This fund will not be financing energy efficiency of public buildings or of companies. It will finance buildings where households live, and only those households who are most vulnerable. So the total amount that this fund will generate or mobilize is around 86.7 billion euro, and it is to be spent within 7 years. Yes, I understand that you mentioned 34 million people in Europe in energy poverty. However, we again have to be cautious. This fund is not the panacea. It's part of the puzzle. It is helping achieve the emission reduction, so and also it helps the most vulnerable to stop using fossil fuels. This is the idea. It's on the building side, I explained. I mean, it can be heat pumps, it can be energy efficiency, renovation of buildings, it can be even appliances, not on gas, but on electricity, much more efficient. In the transport sector, it is also encouraging the public transport. It can be promoting the electric vehicles. And of course, we were conscious of the immediate effects and the immediate effects might come very quickly because the market has forecasting, let's say, also mechanisms. So very often, if the fuel suppliers know that in 1 or 2 years they will face a new carbon tax, most probably, and know that it's very easy to pass on the costs to the final consumers, they might start trying to do that not from the first year of the emission trading system, but slightly earlier. That's why the Social Climate Fund is created and is to start 1 year before the new emission trading system. So it starts in 26 for 7 years until 32, and the new emission trading system starts from 27. In the transport sector, as I mentioned, we can have public transport and in the electric vehicles. And for this intermediary and the first start, we also have foreseen, and this is novelty in a way for the EU funding, maybe in the agricultural sector, in the common agricultural policy, it's more obvious, but here we have direct income support. And after the negotiations, this is of course to be limited. It's only pending the effects of these more cost-effective measures that will come, but it will take some time for the building renovation, for the heat pumps to be bought and installed. So the Parliament and the Council agreed to have around 37.5% of the total amount of the fund spent on direct income support. And this needs to be, of course, scheduled when, and also the Parliament was very tricky in the negotiations. They really wanted to have assurance that only those households that will benefit from the long-term measures for renovation of buildings or energy efficient appliances will be those who would get the income support. Because if you only get the income support, you will be in a way discouraged from taking care of your long-term. And the idea is to have long-term. Because if you just get the income support, you will be alleviated from the first even 7 years of the system, but then it will be a big, like an avalanche dropped on you, and then this is very important. This is how the system will work. There might be more questions to me, or I can go have some ideas what you were interested in, but maybe I'll stop here to see further interest. Thanks.
Ja, ich gehe davon aus, dass es durchaus noch Fragen geben wird.
Well, I think that there will be more questions later on. Well, do you believe that this climate funding, just transition, the participation of member states, do you believe that this approach that will be enough to tackle things? Because I believe that there will be some doubts in the EESC. And then also when it comes to the timing, 7 years is too short for such a procedure. Maybe we need more instruments so that we can really deliver on this social aid.
Thank you very much. Yes, the question whether the amount of the fund is enough was very widely debated when the Commission, by the way, proposed larger fund, 72 billion euro, but it was a proposal, and the final act and the final fund is negotiated between the member states in the council and the parliament. And the outcome was the 65 billion. It was very difficult. As I said, the multi-annual financial framework was not open. But as I said, this fund will mobilize 86.7 billion euro for these 7 years. And I believe, and this is the conviction of the Commission, that this fund is enough, but the member states, together with the social partners, with the trade unions, with the youth organizations, with the regional and local authorities, they need to establish the proper social climate plans. And in these social climate plans, first they have to identify concretely who should be the target of that concrete fund. Because, of course, the money is scarce, but we have said that the fund should be targeted on the most vulnerable. And, of course, this is to be decided member state by member state, taking into account also the geographical specificities, like Malta, where maybe the building sector is not that vulnerable, like the households are not that vulnerable, but the transport is a big issue in Malta. And there are many other elements. So, and I have opened here a very interesting report, and I can give you the differences, how important is the targeting. And the targeting is for the member states, but the Commission, together with the Parliament at the negotiations, the Parliament insisted at a very important public consultation of the social climate plans. And the Commission is also now facilitating the member states to with the exchange of good practices, how to do that best. And we will come back to them, but the social partners, as I mentioned, the youth organization, women organizations, and many others are mentioned within the, even in the Social Climate Fund regulation. And they need to have their say, and the Commission, when we will assess the plans, like for the Recovery Resilience Facility, and we will take very much into account how these recommendations of the social partners and youth organizations were taken into account for the final plan. And again, for the targeting. As I said, this fund is supposed to cover these sectors that are addressed by the new emission trading system for road transport and buildings. So this emission trading is covering the fuels used for combustion in the building sector and in the transport sector. And I can give you the example of natural gas, used natural gas in buildings, for heating in buildings. In Bulgaria, guess how many households use natural gas to heat their buildings? It's only 3%. 3%. I am Bulgarian, and from the past, from the socialist time, it is in the villages, this is coal, unfortunately, and wood, not the most bio neutral, and in the big cities, it is district heating. And the district heating is already included in the new emission trade, in the old emission trading, because this is electricity and district heating, this is included. So in the big cities where millions live, they are already included. So it's only 3%. But the gasoline and diesel, altogether it's 47%, like 50% of the households use those. And then if you go to Germany, for the natural gas is 51%. And guess, in Hungary, 76% of the households heat their homes by gas. You see, it's not that the money is little; it simply needs to be targeted, and that's the role of the member states, but also your role as stakeholders, as trade unions and social partners. But maybe Frank, yeah.
Thank you, Milena. I would like to add just one comment.
referring back to the fair transition recommendation. If I understood, the question was, are the Just Transition Fund and the Social Climate Fund enough to support the fair green transition? That's probably not what the Commission is saying. And as Milena said, this is targeted support to people affected in their employment or to people affected by the increased energy prices due to the new emissions trading. In the paper accompanying the proposal for fair transition recommendation, the Commission had listed in the annex, upon request of all stakeholders, a list of funds for supporting fair transition, EU funds. Obviously, all of the funds contribute to this, the RRF in particular, the cohesion funds, Horizon Europe even, through measures to implement, making 100 cities climate neutral by 2030. I think, and that's what we try to do, even if it's non-binding, and we come to that in a minute, through this recommendation to have member states discuss this and to discuss the need to coordinate their inputs, coordinate their policies, including the use of the funds at EU, national and other levels, with a view to addressing these employment and social impacts. So the answer is no, this is not enough. Yeah. But the features are interesting, and the features I think also from a communication perspective interesting, because it's front-loading support before a measure kicks in, and it is building in a conditionality that structural measures and minimum income are being combined also over time. And I think this is important to communicate to people that, let's say, the transition phase is being built into this fund. So thank you. These are two important comments I would like to make.
If I may just add something for the particular, and fully agree with what Frank mentioned on the availability of other funds. Whether there will be new funds, most probably there will be discussions at the next MFF, which will come not next year, but maybe the year after. Also with the next MFF, this Social Climate Fund, there is a commitment from the side of the Commission, but also from the side of the co-legislators to put this fund in the multi-annual financial framework. But last thing is that when the member states are to propose their social climate plans, these plans are to be coherent, and there should be synergies with all other plans and funds that and the commitments made by the member states. And we, particularly as also Frank mentioned, we are now checking the drafts, national energy and climate plans, and we check if these plans are enough and propose a good analytical basis for the social climate fund and the plans of the member states. And unfortunately we can say not yet there, but okay, we will give recommendations and then hopefully the member states will improve. And also the Commission is doing a lot to facilitate the work of the member states, to give them good practices on the most cost-effective measures, on how to do the good practices of public consultations with stakeholders. We have also do not significant harm. All measures, the structural measures should be compliant with that. We need to provide coherent guidance. So we are and the Commission is giving assistance, technical assistance to the member states. Thank you.
Ja, vielen Dank.
Thank you. Well, please do not misunderstand me. It's a very useful instrument, and the member states will be crucial when it comes to play a role when it comes to energy plan or climate mitigation. It's crucial that this share of work between the Commission and the member states is identified and respected, but we will talk about it later on. And now I will welcome Corinna, who is member of the unions, people here know you very well. You are senior policy in industrial Europe, so you know very well the important issues linked to the just transition. You have a huge experience in the topic. You've been working a lot in this, so that this topic is dear to everybody. You know very well the instruments that we have at present, and in this context I will give you the floor now so that you can tell us more when it comes to the political gaps at the European level. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, and good morning to everybody. So,
EU level, from the perspective of industrial Europe, we consider what has been proposed is a very good first step, because a decade ago I think we did not speak about just transition at all. So I mean, we have now some first proposals on just transition and some first elements of just transition. We have a just transition fund. So we have to also acknowledge that the European policymakers have woken up and seen that there must be something done to address the employment transition. However, what we see is very much, I think Ben said it this morning, is very much reactive and not proactive. In the contrast to what we've seen in the past, transitions in the past, we actually have the potential now. We have the opportunity to shape the transition and anticipate the change. But actually, we do not have really the tools. And what am I talking here is also the involvement of stakeholders, social dialogue, and really meaningful social dialogue, and strengthening the tools that we have at EU level. So what we have at EU level, we consider very much fragmented and add-ons to what the Commission proposed in terms of the Green Deal and Fit for 55, but it's not comprehensive enough. If we take the Just Transition Fund, it's there to support carbon-intensive regions and coal regions in transition, but it does not consider whole sectors of the economy that will also need to change. Let me give you the example of automotive manufacturing, where we will see a shift to EV manufacturing, which will have an impact of the world of work, in not only in the original manufacturers, but also in the supply chain. So you have a whole set of employees, workers, and regions that are currently not covered by this fund. You have also the same discussion in aviation, aviation manufacturing, then shipbuilding. You can also count on textile and the shift of within the textile manufacturing sector. So I think what we need is more a comprehensive framework that includes all sectors and looks in all regions that will undergo the transition. And that is what we are currently not seeing. Furthermore, so quality of the transition, we do not need only look into the financial dimension. You cannot only throw money on the problem. You have to also address a problem by really enshrining the rights for participation. And from a trade union perspective, and I said it already, we need to actually strengthen the workers' rights in this framework. as Industry All Europe, and we are joining forces with ETUC, we are demanding for a legislative framework for just transition, a legislative framework for the anticipation and management of change that strengthens the right to social dialogue, meaningful social dialogue, to meaningful information and consultation at the company level, to also that actually requiring companies to set up just transition plans in social dialogue with the workers that are based on the decarbonization plans that this and strategies that companies are making, so that in every company you will have in place a job-to-job strategy, a transition strategy. So we need more information and consultation, and meaningful information and consultation at company level. But also, and I'm coming back on what was already said, we need also the implementation of the requirements of the minimum wage directive. That you have a strengthening of sectoral collective bargaining and achieving this 80% target, because we have seen that in many countries collective bargaining was under attack. It took place primarily on the company level and not on the sectoral level. While on the sectoral level, you ensure that more workers in the sector are covered by collective bargaining agreements, while on the company level you have the problem that in many countries you also have a strategy of employers on making use of yellow unions, and also that actually that you do not come to the quality that is needed. So and maybe quickly coming back to funding, because I forgot to mention something. You also have to look at the future funding. And what will happen after 2026, and the current financial resources of the RRF are ending. We have to actually make sure that there's also sufficient funding in the future, and we do not face a funding gap of the transition. And that in that context, we have to look into the 2040 target that are currently under debate. The Scientific Climate Advisory Committee of the Commission suggests that for 2040, the European Union will need to actually step up the emission target and we will have to reach by 2040 a reduction of emissions by 90 to 95%. This will require enormous funding, and we are actually, I mean, what we, if you put it into, if you compare to what we, the emission reductions that we have so far, we are at 32% only. So you see the dimension of the problem, and you see that the shift will only accelerate. And that means also the financial means that we need will be massive and massively increasing. So you have to also look into that. Maybe I stop here, and maybe you have also more questions to me. Thank you.
Ja, vielen Dank.
Thank you. We are on the same page. And we are talking the same language here, indeed. Information and consultation are major mechanisms, indeed. And we also need to help worker representatives in the businesses. This is a problem sometimes because unions sometimes see this as a threat for the other workers. But we need to accompany this process. So training and consultation play a major role. We also achieved an agreement that is not being transposed when it comes to private transport. So how can we integrate all the levels in this?
Or not also as a possible, as a main element is actually look into, first of all, when we talk about anticipative legislative framework for the anticipation and management of change, this should also make it a requirement for companies to actually anticipate the change together with the employees, and that there is a planning, a strategic planning. As I said, there should be some kind of decarbonization planning, but also a strategic employment planning that involves the workers and the trade unions in social dialogue in this planning. A leverage that you could use, and I think it has been already widely discussed here also today, is social conditionality. So to tie any form of public funding, be it state aid, tax incentives, and so on and so forth, and also European funding, national funding, tie it to the requirement of companies to actually engage in social dialogue, to engage in collective bargaining, and to engage in meaningful information and consultation with the employees. I think, and we see it, and this concept actually, we see that this has been proposed in the US with the IRA. While we have it here only in a number of countries, we heard that there are some initiatives where funding is tied to social conditionality, but we have to bring it at the EU level, and we have to really insist that any kind of funding that goes into the transition has to have ties with the anticipation of change and social dialogue with unions.
Ja, vielen Dank dafür. Vorerst, wir kommen.
Thank you a lot. And now, William Cockburn is online from OSHA. Is he online? Is everything working?
Good morning, everybody.
Herr Cockburn, vielen Dank. Wir hören und sehen Sie. Das ist schon mal sehr positiv.
Yeah, we can hear you. This is good. You are the executive director of OSHA in the European Union, and with your agency you have a huge responsibility when it comes to development of health and safety in businesses. You are putting in place a variety of activities in your strategic framework when it comes to health and safety at the workplace, and you are also promoting a variety of other actions. And in this transition, we cannot forget health and safety for workers. So now we need to redevelop the existing framework at European level so that it can really play a role, as well as other measures that already had a good impact. So now we need to develop more the existing framework we already have. We also observed improvements in a variety of regulation when it comes to cancerogenic materials. We have done a lot. So what is your position at present, given the challenges that we have linked to climate change and that have an impact on workers? What is your position when it comes also to extreme weather conditions that are a concern for society and have a negative impact for health, as well as cardiovascular diseases? So what do we need to do more? Mr. Cockburn.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that introduction and for the opportunity to address the committee this morning on this important aspect. Indeed, as you say, good quality jobs, ensuring a high level of health and safety at work is an essential part of a just transition. Health and safety at work, decent jobs are recognised in Principle 10 of the European Pillar of Social Rights. Recently, the ILO added that right to its list of fundamental rights and principles at work, and it also speaks to Sustainable Development Goal number 8. And in fact, the European Commission's strategic framework on safety and health at work 2021 to 27 is structured around the twin digital and green transitions in addition to the demographic transition. And it's essential that we take care of this aspect of the transitions. And for the part of the green transition, the impacts that we can foresee are quite important. We can split those into different categories. For example, the direct effects of climate change. And in recent years in Europe, you're all aware of the very high-profile cases that took place of deaths related to working in high temperatures. And this is something that is requiring action. We've recently published guidance on working in high temperatures, and that's translated into all languages. And there's a real call for action in this area. But direct effects of climate change are also impacting on people's health and safety at work in terms of dealing with extreme weather events, whether that's forest fires or whether that's flooding. And of course, you have injury risks, you have, as you mentioned just now, risks of dangerous substances, poor air quality, and all sorts of hazards related to natural diseases. There are also related psychosocial risks. Those involved in disaster recovery and emergency services can suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. Farmers working in the agricultural sector are subject to high degree of uncertainty and unpredictability, and this is adding to mental health problems. So we have all of these direct effects related to climate change. There are also some indirect effects. For example, rising temperatures are increasing the spread of ticks and mosquitoes carrying diseases which affect forestry workers, farmers, all those who are working outdoors. And then within this area of climate-induced risks, we also have occupational safety and health risks related to the mitigation actions, so-called green jobs, those working in wind sector, solar energy. Commercial diving, or a highly risky activity, is really increasing in terms of offshore wind energy, for example. We have building refurbishment, and you're well familiar with the increased risk to asbestos in the built infrastructure through the refurbishment of buildings to improve energy efficiency. And then, as we heard just earlier as well, we need workers to know about the risks related to repairing and maintaining electric vehicles or energy storage in batteries and so on. So a whole host of potential risks with the green transition, and the same goes for the digital transition. And this is having fundamental changes in how we work. So increasing use of automation, increasing amounts of remote work or telework. We've got new tasks, and all of this brings with it new risks. But digitalization is also impacting on how work is managed. So we're seeing algorithmic management, like you might see in online platforms, or employers using human resource analytics programs for business efficiency. All of this technology in itself is neutral. The effects that it have, whether positive or negative, really depend on how that technology is designed, how it's implemented and managed in the workplace. And this is where consultation and participation of workers is absolutely fundamental through all of those stages. We're also seeing how digitalization can affect how occupational safety and health is managed itself. Traditionally, occupational safety and health is an area where employers and workers come to the table with their own perspectives and their own information relating to the issues at hand. If there are extensive monitoring and data collection systems in place, it's important that workers also have access and are aware of all of that information and what's being collected, so that that equal negotiation on occupational safety and health is maintained. So a lot of important issues.
Vielen Dank. Wenn Sie nun die Möglichkeit hätten, selbst zu entscheiden, welche...
Thank you. If you have the possibility to decide the measures to be taken, what is, in your opinion, the best measure or the best policy to transpose if you have to take the decision?
Well, in the area of occupational safety and health, I mean, we've got a strong regulatory framework in Europe. We have the Framework Directive, 23 daughter directives. There's currently initiatives underway to update a number of directives, as you mentioned, carcinogens and mutagens, controlling exposure to asbestos, lead, and other dangerous substances. And there's also important updating that's pending on the display screen equipment directive, on the workplaces directive, all of which are strong pieces of legislation, but clearly need to be updated to reflect the use of today's digital technologies. And at the same time, there's the social partner negotiations on the right to disconnect and on conditions around telework, which will have the force of a directive. So all of these initiatives are important framework. But what's absolutely important is that we ensure that this regulation not only covers all of the groups of workers affected, but also that there is then compliance, that employers are acting according to the provisions of the legislation. And the matter is that when we're looking particularly at the climate transition, we see many workers in agriculture, in construction, or cleaning, or street cleaning, waste management, even healthcare emergency workers, who are in situations where maybe their job is not directly covered by occupational safety and health legislation because they're self-employed or even in the undeclared sector. We're seeing poor prevention measures, particularly in micro and small enterprises, compared to when workers are in larger organizations, and where we've got subcontracting chains or the use of agency workers, these risks are particularly high. In the agriculture sector, I mean, migrant seasonal workers are at particular risk. And all of these collectives are less likely to be in situations where they're covered by formal worker representation. In the research that we've carried out at EU OSHA, we've focused on what are the main drivers for improving compliance, for encouraging employers to take action. And on the one hand, the main motivation is to have a clear legal framework and also to have effective inspection, advice, enforcement. And on the other hand, to overcome barriers. And the main barriers for employers are a lack of expertise. So we need more guidance, more tools. And EU OSHA has been very active in the development of guidance and tools. And on the other hand, more resources, and we're looking at also the effectiveness of external prevention services and how all of these actors, including the Labour Inspectorate, can be coordinated in a way that encourages employers to comply with the legislation and provide effective prevention for their workers. And I'd stress again, all groups of workers here, not just those in the larger enterprises where there are better prevention measures.
Vielen Dank. Ich gebe Ihnen recht. Wir brauchen einerseits einen.
Thank you. I totally agree with you. We need a global approach, but we also have need targeted measures. It's also important to provide more resources and funding. This is what I can say as a unionist. But now I will give the floor to Andrea Casamenti. Welcome. You are the policy coordinator for Just Transition at Solidar. You are also coordinator of the European Alliance for a Just Transition. You are working in a variety of organizations, but you're also working on transversal levels. Solidar is an organization with umbrella organization for 50 organizations fighting for solidarity, participation, and equality. And this puts you very close to our unions. You are coordinator in Solidar, and you also represent the European Alliance. You are very active in your role as a coordinator as well, especially when it comes to platform workers. How do you see the situation at present for this issue? Thank you.
If I understood correctly, the question you were focusing on platform workers, and I'm afraid I'm not the best person maybe to address the specific focus on platform workers. No,
it was not platform work. It was not platform workers. It was your role as coordinator in the platform for Just Transition.
I could have maybe started going with some messages, but good to keep it more to my role. I mean, platform workers are also outdoor workers impacted by, extreme weather events. So of course it's linked to Just Transition, I would say. But yes, thank you very much and good morning, everyone. I'm a bit conscious of time, so I'll try to be quick. Indeed, just a few, but thank you first to the workers group for putting Just Transition in the spotlight and for inviting me to speak on behalf of Solidar, as you said. Just a few words maybe about Solidar. Indeed, we're a network of progressive civil society organizations across Europe. Many of our members, the network is brought together by the mission of achieving more equal and sustainable societies. And many of our members focus on work and decent work. And that's why also a handful of our members are trade unions, but we also work closely with trade unions. And maybe here, of course, I cannot speak on behalf of all civil society organizations, but I can say that from Solidar's perspective, a just transition is becoming a priority for civil society as well, and we want just transition to become a priority for the European Union. So I think more and more civil society organizations have understood the importance of also working closely with trade unions to ensure a fair and just transition. And I'll go back to speaking about Solidar in a minute, but also to mention, to provide evidence of how many organizations are focusing on this topic. The European Environmental Bureau has done some work on reimagining work for a just transition. They have a publication on this specific topic. Central and Eastern Europe Bankwatch has done extensive work on the territorial just transition plans. The social platform works on investment for a just transition. So I just wanted to show how NGOs, civil society organizations are more and more ready to be engaged and are more active in advocating for a fair and just transition. But yeah, Solidar aims, of course, to be the voice of our member organizations in Brussels. And I have to say that indeed, you mentioned my two roles in Solidar. So, of course, I have a few messages coming from Solidar. But I can say, first of all, how in Solidar we view a just transition. Starting with the fact that, for us, a just transition has become a priority, I think, starting from 2020. And since then, one of our roles has been, or the way we see our role, is to support trade unions, to support the ETUC, industrial, ETUI, the ITUC, and to amplify the trade unions' messages on a just transition. We've adopted a view of just transition that is quite worker-centered, but I also have to admit that we've understood or we've read the ILO guidelines for just transition, which for us are the Bible for just transition in a broad sense. Also adopting a vision of just transition that looks also at the socio-ecological state, at the role of government, for instance, in ensuring a just transition through fair taxation, through investment, through social security, but also a holistic vision that links climate action with socio-economic inequalities. What I would say we haven't really adopted is a vision that is more business-centered, and I'm afraid that this is maybe the vision that we see also coming from maybe the State of the Union address, or also from recent speeches from Executive Vice President Šefčovič, and that's for us not a part of a just transition vision, while, as I said, the others are as well. So I wanted to say, as Solidar, as civil society, we want to amplify the messages from the trade unions. We also want to advocate for better integration of climate and social agendas at European level. So we do that, of course. I mean, we've already several stakeholders have given an assessment of the policies that are there for a just transition at European level. Corinna, you mentioned fragmented add-ons to climate policies. I would also define them in the same way, without, of course, we do want to commend Frank's team and, of course, also the other DGs for the work on just transition, but we do feel that it's not enough. And actually, I think it's not necessary to reinvent the wheel, because a lot of very good ideas for a just transition policy framework or a just transition legislative framework are already out there. And I just wanted to give a few if I have the time. So, for instance, the EESC itself has called for a green and social deal. So we absolutely support their idea as the next strategy of the European Union to achieve climate neutrality, but also advance social justice and reduce socioeconomic inequalities. We support the idea or the proposal from the ETUC for a European directive for just transition that Ben mentioned this morning. We think that it's super important for the European Union to foster the development and implementation of just transition plans, strategies at all levels. We talked about the company level, but of course also, we want to see such strategies at national level, at regional level, at sectoral level, and so on. With, of course, the strong role of social partners. But we talked also about funding this morning. We call for a new funding strategy for a just transition that is along the lines of the next generation EU. We think also that it's super important to guarantee the full implementation of the Council recommendation that Frank was mentioning earlier, as we see that it's a good practice, a good test. Is the establishment of a just transition observatory, which was also already mentioned. Strengthening the implementation of the environmental and social dimensions of the European semester. So this just to say that there are lots of concrete ideas out there on how to implement a real policy framework for just transition. I think the Council recommendation, for instance, calls for such a comprehensive policy framework at national level. We think it's high time to do it also at EU level in a proper, consistent consistent and coherent way. And you mentioned, just to conclude, the European Alliance for a Just Transition. Indeed, we created it at Solidar a couple of years ago, mainly because we realized that it's absolutely fundamental for civil society to speak with workers' representatives, with trade unions, with think tanks, but also within civil society among social NGOs, climate and environmental NGOs, because the challenges ahead are huge when it comes to the design and implementation of a just transition. So we wanted to promote spaces for a diverse group of organizations to come together, and we hope to see such opportunities to speak, really diverse actors to speak and to come together at all levels, at national level, but of course also at local level and so on. Thank you.
Herr Casamente, vielen Dank für die kurze.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed for this brief but nonetheless very interesting presentation when it comes to different positions. And that means that it would be very useful and smart to join forces for a better reach. I think we are on the right track, and I suggest we now start our discussion. It could be very brief, the conclusions can be very brief, and that would mean that we still have a bit of time to reply to your questions. Please, in your questions, be brief so that we can answer them very quickly. Thank you. The floor is yours.
My name is Kristina Krupavičienė. I am from Lithuania, Lithuanian Trade Union Solidarumas. I truly was very interested of that's what Karina said about company level agreements and branch agreements, because we have a very big problem in Lithuania that our employers truly like to have a company level, only company level, and we are very happy if we have a company level agreements, because branch agreements in private sector, it's very difficult even to collect all of employers. Here it's many reasons why they don't want to join to branch agreement, because not stable economical situation, crisis, Ukraine, China crisis, many crises, and trade unions truly don't have any arguments to improve that. Okay, let me start to talk about, from example, like a minimum wage. Minimum wage, we have a negotiation at country level for everybody. And that's, usually they like to keep that minimum wage, and later they, at about 50, you can get even 50% some bonuses, some additional money if you work overtime, if you are able to work on Sundays and Saturdays, etc. And for us, it's very difficult to prove how we need to negotiate that branch agreements. And truly, we have a cooperation with, we are members of industry, all our industry trade unions, and we truly like some support. I don't know, maybe somebody should start to talk in the highest level how it's important that's branch agreements, because every time to negotiate at company level, it's trade union need a lot of resources, a lot of efforts. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. It's probably more of an observation than a question, but the catchy phrase, leaving no one behind, was almost on everyone's lips today. And it has a very serious flaw that we know that it's just a wishful thinking, because the rich will always flee first. In any catastrophe, rich always escape, they flee, because they have a lot to lose. The poor, they suffer the most. Now, in the current circumstances of huge environmental, climate, biodiversity crisis, the most precise phrase to rally everyone is we are in the same boat. We all are in the same boat. So, to cut my speech short, the climate communicators suggest using this in the same boat metaphor instead of this leaving no one behind, which is unfortunately more or less just wishful thinking. Think of this. Thank you so much.
Vielen Dank. Gibt es noch Fragen? Dumitro, very short, please.
Just for the European Commission and regarding the state aid rules, because we have a lot of state aid which is granted everywhere in Europe. The rich countries, they afford a lot of state aid, but the countries which don't have these opportunities, even the small amount they have is no recommendation and is no obligation to grant the state aid according to this climate objective and according to this just transition obligations. So the state aid is very important because many companies are taking decision of investment in regions based on the state aid schemes. So in the future we can do more in this regard, because as the experience we have in the last 10 years of just transition, so call it, we have no result based on these state aid schemes and based on the investors' decision to go in a region. It's a theme which is obsessing us, because every time they are saying that we have big amounts of money which are available in international markets, and we don't understand why we cannot convince these investors to go in these regions in depression, where you can immediately ensure 2,000 jobs available, but they are just scared about these regions, and this, I think it's a game changer if we will succeed to do something in this regard. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank, Dumitru. Jetzt bleibt uns noch die Zeit für...
So, thank you very much, Dimitru. I am taking a look around. We have some time for a concluding sentence for all those who took the floor today, and I will start with Frank Sieben.
Avoid fragmentation, this recent crisis, and the forward-looking work by Mr. Letta or others on reporting on the state of single market competitive strategies probably will also have to address these questions. And Milena alluded to the upcoming negotiation on the MFF, future financial framework, which also has a role to play here. I would like to come back to the interesting idea on that we are all in the same boat. I think we do work also on carbon inequalities and how can we ensure fairness of sharing costs and efforts also in the transition. So yes, while you're all in the same boat, hopefully moving towards avoiding the climate crisis. You cannot flee from the climate change and climate crisis. You also must not allow inequalities to grow within this boat, and to have those who can move the boat forward do that as forcefully as they can do. So I would understand it also in this direction. I'll stop with this one.
Vielen Dank, Frau Damianova, bitte.
I think that Frank responded to all the questions that were to the Commission. Thank you.
So maybe coming back to the question from the colleague from Solidarumas, I mean, this is actually what we are doing. We are trying to support our members in actually strengthening social dialogue and collective bargaining on the member state level. And we know, we are very well aware, in some countries there's no employer organizations to bargain with. So that collective bargaining is taking place at the company level. And I mentioned, it's not only an issue of the resources that you have, but it's an issue of quality and the quality outcome of all the workers in one sector. So, and there shouldn't be an abuse of this system of fragmented collective bargaining bargaining, where some workers have different conditions and there's social dumping taking place. So we've been running a campaign on collective bargaining to strengthen collective bargaining, the minimum wage directive and the action plan to increase collective bargaining to 80% coverage is very important. It's a very important achievement, and we are actually continuing on our calls to actually, with this idea of a legislative framework for the anticipation of management and change, or the Just Transition Directive, as Ben mentioned it, it's the same thing that we are actually asking for, that it looks into exactly this strengthening collective bargaining and giving social partners and trade unions the tools to negotiate quality jobs. So we are also going to launch a good industrial jobs campaign later this month, which picks up on that and picks up on our demands on a just transition. So we need to get away from a pure quantitative approach and measurement of the transition. We have to go into the qualitative approach, and this means quality of jobs. And how can we ensure quality of jobs is through social dialogue. And social dialogue means we need negotiations between trade unions and employer organizations. And this must be picked up at EU level, and it must be enshrined by better legislation and strengthening of the rights and implementation of the current rights. Thank you.
Vielen Dank. Ich darf nun Herrn Cockburn bitten.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cockburn, please, if you want to say a concluding remark.
Is he connected?
Mr. Cockburn, are you still connected?
So we can use this minute for Mr. Casamente, please.
Sure, happy to jump in. Yes, I'll use my concluding remarks actually to make a new point. Sorry about that. But I think sometimes, I mean, we should absolutely not forget that we do not live on an island, and that the green transition in Europe, of course, needs to be just for people in Europe and for workers in Europe, but it also needs to be just for people outside of Europe. So that's why, I mean, there are several cases in which it's quite clear that the EU is not doing enough in terms of ensuring that the green transition process doesn't place the burden on the shoulders of developing countries. So just to say very quickly, as Solidar, we're calling for a global Green Deal. We're calling for more policy coherence between the climate, trade, social and development agendas. We call for fostering equitable and mutually beneficial partnerships, and for more international solidarity, which is in the forms then of debt cancellation for the Global South, making green financing accessible, and reforming the international financial structure.
Thank you so much, Mr. Casamente. Do we have Mr. Cockburn? Yeah.
Yes, hello. I was with you all the time. I wasn't able to activate my speak button, but I can do now. Thank you for the opportunity. I just want to emphasize the importance of raising awareness about all the issues that we've been discussing today, but particularly from our perspective around digitalization and health and safety at work. And just a few days ago, we launched our new Healthy Workplaces campaign, Safe and Healthy Work in the Digital Age. And our campaigns are the biggest campaigns on occupational safety and health in the world. We achieved that by engaging our network of national focal points, and each focal point at member state level has a network that involves the social partners. So it's really, truly inclusive campaign, and this will be running for the next 24 months. We also have some key campaign partners, and I'd like to recognize Industrial as one of our regular campaign partners, contributing to making that campaign a success. So I invite all of you to visit our website and to join in the campaign and getting this message across to as broad an audience as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cockburn. Vielen Dank an alle Rednerinnen und Redner, die
Thank you very much. Thank you to every one of you who have taken part in our meeting today. Thank you for taking the time. The discussion of today is now closed, but we will not remain where we are. We will still be working. There will be still a lot to do for the years or even the decades to come. I think that today we have mentioned many aspects, and all these aspects will keep us busy for the future. It's also up to us to insist. I think that the trade union role is key. Without trade union, without our partners, this will not take the right direction. That's the reason why it is a key topic for our work in the next few years. I note the fact that nobody should be set aside and that we need to use all the instruments that we have. And we also take note of the fact that the national as well as European level play a crucial role when it comes to the legal framework. We need a regulation, mandatory regulation for the just transition. We will need further measure when it comes to continuous training and learning. And when it comes to the first part of the meeting, a foundation that we have, or the trust we have in Austria, is something to be developed. Each and every member state has started to take measures, and now we need to start working on the comparative work. We need to filter the best of each member state and do some kind of melting pot with the European level. Thank you very much, Peter. Last week we had the opportunity to talk about that. So we have a narrative as Group 2, and that narrative should be fine-tuned or sharpened. We need to speak of a single voice, and we need to have we need to know as Group 2 how we want to influence discussions in the future. We have a lot of experience when it comes to revolution, transformation, automation, electrification, and so on and so forth. A lot of experience with some defeats, but also with successes. And at the end of the day, there's always been the possibility to create a framework for representing workers. And this really contributes to my own belief that as a union, we can support climate change and digitalization. If we don't do that, nobody will. I still have 3 minutes. 3 minutes that I will kindly leave to Marie-Carmen. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Thomas. I just had a bit of a problem with my computer. So, as a matter of conclusion, I would like to highlight the very rich element of today. We've had a lot of participants from the academic, workers' organization, or training sectors. Climate and energy transition will take a shape that has not been defined yet. My first message is the following. The staff representative workers' representatives have to be strengthened in their role, because the success or failure of this transition will depend on the policies that will be developed. And there are quite a lot of elements that we need to define. Of course, along with this process, people must be at the very heart of the process, and it should be centered around the most vulnerable talking still about employment integration. We need funding. We need a lot of training and a lot of funding to do so, and this was mentioned this morning. Investment in training is as important as investment in other strategic matters, and it has an impact on us because you need to recognize the right to training and to make sure that this training is professional and validated, certified. It must be useful for our future on the labor market. These are factors to be transposed at collective bargaining level. There must be green collective bargaining, and we should have the opportunity to strengthen democracy in the labor environment for workers, and in the working time should be reduced, and working time should include training time, training that is necessary for finding a new qualified job. Every time I have a speech to make, I would like to make this reminder. We have territorial plans for just transition. Just transition should adopt some kind of modalities that can be applied to territories, as we could see today. And the ongoing development require some participation of social dialogue and social partners. No territorial framework should have transition plan without social dialogue. This means that collective bargaining need to talk about these measures. Otherwise, transition will not be just and will not be respectful of employment. Thank you. Thank you to everybody. Thank you to everyone around the table and to those who have accompanied us today. Thank you, Yolanda. The interpreter will thank you.
Managed in a wonderful way. Of course, all our distinguished speakers, very valuable input into our work. And just repeat, this is going to be a part of